You've been carrying too much for too long. The pressure, the noise, the thoughts that never stop, smiling on the outside, but inside. You're tired, not just in your body, but in your soul. That deep, quiet kind of tired that no nap, no vacation, no distraction can fix. They told you healing means fixing everything, getting stronger, becoming someone else. But that's not the truth. Real healing doesn't start with effort. It starts with letting go, with silence, with presence. Because peace isn't something you earn, it's something you return to. And tonight, that's exactly what you're going to do. These Buddhist teachings aren't religion, they aren't rules, they're medicine for the restless mind, the aching heart, the part of you that just wants to feel safe inside your own skin again. As you listen, something will shift. Your breath will slow, your thoughts will soften, and that heavy feeling on your chest, it'll start to lift. You don't need to try harder. You don't need to fix yourself. You just need to listen, to receive, to be here now, without guilt, without judgment, without fear. This isn't just another audio to fall asleep to. This is a quiet transformation, a return to stillness, a chance to remember who you are underneath the noise. Are you ready? Let's begin. In a world that never stops talking, silence is rare, not just on the outside, but inside your own mind. The running commentary, the endless what-ifs, the looping self-doubt, it never lets you rest. And here's the truth. No one tells you you don't need more answers, you need space. Noble silence is that space, not awkward, not empty, not lonely. It's a living, breathing presence that softens your thoughts without force. It's the absence of noise, but the fullness of awareness. When you stop speaking, you start hearing, not others, but yourself, the parts of you that you've been ignoring, the emotions buried under distraction, the clarity hidden beneath the chaos. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's not zoning out or escaping. It's a conscious choice to sit with what is, not to fix it, not to name it, just to let it be. And when you allow yourself to just be, something shifts. Your nervous system, always braced for attack, finally starts to release. Your shoulders soften, your chest loosens, your breath deepens. You begin to feel safe again. And when you feel safe, healing becomes possible. You don't need to talk it out or explain your pain to understand it. Some wounds don't want analysis. They want presence, and presence lives in silence. In Buddhist practice, noble silence is not silence for the sake of politeness or withdrawal. It is a tool of awakening, a deliberate step away from the compulsion to react, to explain, to narrate every moment. Because every time we speak without awareness, we reinforce a self that's constantly grasping for identity, for control, for meaning. But in silence, that grasping relaxes. You stop trying to impress, to defend, to entertain. And in that space, the ego, that restless, protective voice inside, begins to loosen its grip. You start to meet yourself without performance, not the version shaped by others' expectations, not the mask of strength you wear to survive, just you, raw, honest, still. And yes, at first, it can be uncomfortable, because silence doesn't just quiet the noise, it reveals what's underneath. All the suppressed emotion, all the unfinished grief, all the guilt you buried with busyness. It rises. But that rising isn't a problem. It's part of the process. What's been hidden needs to be seen before it can soften. And silence gives it room. In noble silence, you're not running away. You're staying. You're staying with your discomfort long enough to hear what it's trying to say. And more often than not, pain doesn't ask for solutions. It asks for acknowledgement. When you stop distracting yourself, the body speaks. That tightness in your stomach, that ache in your chest, those tears you didn't know were waiting. They surface, not to break you, but to release what's been held for too long. Modern life trains us to fear this part. To cover pain with productivity, to replace silence with screens. But the more we numb, the more we carry. And eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. Silence gives you a way to set it down. It's in those quiet moments, when you finally stop doing, that you begin undoing. You untie the knots of old stories. You loosen the tension between who you are and who you pretend to be. You give the mind a break from needing to narrate every feeling. And in that stillness, you start hearing something different. Not the voice of fear or judgment, but something slower, gentler, wiser. Some call it intuition, some call it inner knowing. In Buddhism, it's simply awareness, pure and unfiltered, noticing without clinging, understanding without effort. This awareness doesn't speak in words. It speaks through sensations, through breath, through silence. And when you're quiet enough, you can feel its guidance. You make better choices. You understand things without needing to analyze them. You become less reactive, more steady, not because you've learned new thoughts, but because you've created space between you and the noise. And here's the paradox: the quieter you get, the more you feel. But not in an overwhelming way. You feel with clarity. You start to recognize what's real and what's just mental clutter. You realize how much energy you've been spending reacting to things that don't truly matter. When the inner chatter fades, peace isn't something you have to reach for. It's already there, beneath the stories, beneath the resistance. That's why monks and practitioners enter periods of noble silence, not to escape life, but to reconnect with it, to stop being lost in the movie of thought and start being present for what's actually happening, inside and out. And the healing that happens in that stillness, it's not dramatic. It doesn't look like breakthroughs or fireworks. It looks like breathing deeper, feeling lighter, noticing beauty again, finding patience where you used to explode, feeling compassion where there was judgment, sleeping better, waking up with less dread. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you figured everything out, but because you made space to feel what's true. Noble silence also teaches you how much words can drain you. Every sentence you speak from fear, from defensiveness, from needing to be heard or validated, it costs you energy, and the more you speak without awareness, the more disconnected you feel. But when you speak after silence, when your words come from presence, they land differently. They carry clarity. They don't add to the noise. They bring peace. Even in relationships, silence becomes powerful. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop filling every space with talk. You start listening, really listening, You hear what people don't say. You become more patient, more kind, more connected. You realize that being understood isn't always about explaining yourself. Sometimes it's about understanding yourself first, and silence makes that possible. Even spiritually, silence has a sacred role. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering comes from craving control, certainty, attention, escape. And every time we speak compulsively, we often reinforce those cravings. But silence interrupts that pattern. It teaches you how to be with things as they are, without needing to change them. You begin to see thoughts not as facts, but as passing weather. You notice emotions without becoming them. And with practice, that witnessing becomes steady. It becomes your home base, your inner refuge. Noble silence doesn't mean shutting down. It means opening up to something deeper than words. To a stillness that holds wisdom you can't hear when you're always talking. It's not about rejecting life. It's about engaging with life. More honestly, more fully, more gently. You become more alive in your quiet than you ever were in your noise. This is why in many Buddhist monasteries, silence isn't just part of the practice. It is the practice. It trains you to become aware without reacting, to feel without clinging, to rest without needing permission. And eventually, silence stops being something you do and becomes something you are. A quality you carry with you. Even in conversation, even in the middle of chaos. You speak less, but say more. You do less, but feel more. You chase less, but experience more. This is the medicine your tired heart has been needing. Not another strategy, not another solution, but a space to finally breathe. And tonight, you're not here to perform. You're not here to fix yourself. You're here to let go, to soften, to return. So as the noise of the day fades, let this silence hold you, not to make sense of everything, but to rest in the presence that doesn't need anything from you. Here, in this moment, there is nothing to prove, nothing to say, just breath and stillness and a quiet place where healing begins. You've arrived, and you're safe here. And as you rest in that silence, something deeper begins to stir. Not just peace, but a kind of warmth. A soft energy that moves toward your pain instead of away from it. A presence that doesn't rush to fix you, yet refuses to abandon you. This is where silence meets the heart. And what arises from that meeting is karuna. Karuna is not just feeling sorry for someone. It's not the sad nods or the empty words. People say when they don't know what else to offer. It's not sympathy that looks from a distance. It's not pity that sees you as broken. Karuna is something else entirely. It is compassion with depth. Compassion that enters the room and stays. Compassion that stands beside suffering without needing to shrink it or escape it. It is one of the 4 immeasurables in Buddhist teaching, boundless states of mind that open the heart beyond limitation. And karuna is what opens the door when suffering knocks. It does not turn away. It does not hide behind positive thinking or force forgiveness. It faces pain, head-on, but without violence, without panic, without control. True karuna starts by understanding that suffering is not a failure. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a universal experience. Everyone suffers, not just those who cry out loud, but even those who seem fine. And when you truly know that, your heart softens, not just toward others, but also toward yourself. Because the first step in karuna is recognizing that you are deserving of it too, that your struggles, no matter how small they seem compared to others, are worth holding with tenderness. Most people skip this part. They offer kindness outwardly, but turn harshness inward. They say things to themselves they would never say to a friend. Karuna interrupts that pattern. It begins by sitting with your own pain without judging it, by holding the fear, the sadness, the anger as you would hold a crying child, not trying to silence it, not trying to justify it, but simply being with it until it begins to unfold. This is not weakness. This is a strength. Few people ever learn the strength to stay present with suffering, not run, not escape, not harden. And when you develop that compassion for yourself, something beautiful happens. You start to see that same pain in others, even when they try to hide it. You no longer react to cruelty with cruelty, because you understand where it comes from. Not excusing it, understanding it. Karuna sees the wound under the behavior, and from that seeing, it responds differently. Compassion then becomes active. It's not a passive emotion. It moves, it reaches, it extends. Not because it's trying to be noble, but because it can't help itself. The heart that's been touched by karuna doesn't just witness pain. It moves toward it, with care. It listens without trying to speak over. It holds space without rushing to solve. This is why karuna is so different from pity. Pity looks down. Karuna looks eye to eye. Pity distances. Karuna joins. Pity keeps the other person small. Karuna reminds them of their dignity, even in their darkest hour. Pity says, "That's too bad." Karuna says, "I'm here with you." In practice, this means learning to offer presence rather than solutions. When a friend is hurting, we often jump to advice. We want to fix it so we don't have to feel helpless. But karuna can sit in helplessness without collapsing. It knows that just being there, fully there, is more healing than any advice could ever be. And sometimes karuna is fierce, not angry. Fierce, it speaks truth when truth is needed. It sets boundaries when harm is present. It refuses to feed delusion, even in the name of kindness. Because real compassion doesn't indulge lies, it illuminates them. And it does so with love, not shame. This kind of compassion takes practice. It's not always natural, especially in a culture that praises independence and disguises numbness as strength. But the more you practice karuna, the more it changes you. It shifts the way you see the world. You stop seeing people as problems. You stop seeing yourself as a project. You start seeing the shared thread, the universal tenderness beneath every mask. And that changes everything. When you're rooted in karuna, your reactions change. You become slower to judge, slower to assume. You learn to ask instead of accuse. You become curious instead of defensive. And your presence becomes a kind of healing for those around you, even when you say nothing at all. Because karuna is felt, not just heard. It radiates through body language, through tone, through silence. And most people are starving for that kind of energy, the kind that doesn't demand anything but offers everything. A presence that says, "You're safe, you're seen, you're enough." Even in conflict, karuna shifts the dynamic. Instead of trying to win, you try to understand. Instead of pushing, you pause. You learn to speak from the heart instead of from ego, not because you want to be the bigger person, but because you no longer want to live in a world of constant tension. Karuna also helps release emotional baggage you didn't even know you were carrying. Old resentments, buried shame, self-criticism that played on repeat for years. These begin to soften when held in compassion. You don't need to force forgiveness. You don't need to revisit every detail. You just need to stop adding more pain with judgment. Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's a deep acknowledgement that healing takes time, that progress isn't linear, that some days you'll be gentle, and some days you'll forget everything you've learned. And that's okay. Karuna doesn't measure your worth by your performance. It just stays, no matter what. And when you offer that same compassion to others, you're no longer drained by their struggles, because you're not trying to carry their burden or save them. You're simply being with them. And that is more liberating than trying to fix people who aren't yours to fix. Karuna also teaches you to see the world differently. You notice the waiter who looks tired, the elderly woman crossing the street alone, the colleague who snaps because they're struggling. You don't make up stories, you don't romanticize their pain, but you pause long enough to offer a silent blessing, a gentle thought, a small act of care. That ripples, even if they never know it came from you. Compassion is a kind of wisdom. It knows when to hold on and when to let go, when to intervene and when to step back. It's not always soft, but it's always kind. And the more you align with that frequency, the more you heal, not just your own heart, but the space around you. Karuna doesn't burn you out because it's not about sacrifice. It's about connection. When you help from a place of ego, you feel exhausted. When you serve from a place of genuine compassion, you feel replenished. Because you're no longer trying to be a hero, you're just showing up with an open heart. And there's a kind of freedom in that. The freedom to be human, to let others be human, to stop holding yourself to impossible standards, to stop holding others to them too. Compassion is not perfection. It's presence. And in that presence, healing happens. Even on a global level, karuna matters. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of so much suffering. But compassion is a form of action. Every time you respond with kindness instead of judgment, every time you pause instead of react, you are planting a seed. You are shaping the world, quietly, gently, powerfully. And over time, karuna changes your nervous system. Your reactions slow down. Your stress responses diminish. Your heart opens in places it used to close. Compassion doesn't just heal the mind. It heals the body, the immune system, the hormones, the breath. All respond to the presence of care. You learn to sit with pain without shrinking from it. You learn to offer light even when you feel dim. You learn that some wounds aren't there to be removed. They're there to teach you how to love more deeply. Karuna does not come from certainty. It comes from intimacy with uncertainty. From being with life as it is, not as you want it to be. From letting go of control and reaching for connection instead. And that connection doesn't have to be loud. Often, it's found in the smallest moments. A look, a breath, a hand on the shoulder, a wordless stay. And in those moments, something shifts. Not just in others, but in you. You become a place where people feel safe to be real, where masks drop, where hearts unfold, and maybe for the first time they feel seen, truly seen, not for who they pretend to be, but for who they are right now. That is the power of Karuna. Not just a feeling, not just an idea, but a way of moving through the world, a way of living with a heart that is awake, not fragile, strong because it has learned how to stay soft in a world that teaches you to harden. This tenderness is not a weakness, it's a revolution, and as you rest with this truth, tonight, let your heart know it's okay to be soft. It's okay to feel. It's okay to care without needing to control. Compassion is not a risk. It's a return to your most human self, a return to love without conditions, and that return begins now. And as you begin to open your heart through compassion, something unexpected may surface. A subtle weight that doesn't belong to anyone else. A kind of pain that lingers long after the moment has passed. Not from what was done to you, but from what you've continued to do to yourself. This is where the next layer of healing begins. There is a teaching the Buddha gave that cuts through the root of much of our inner suffering. It's not a complex theory or a spiritual riddle. It's simple, clear, and once you hear it, you'll recognize it instantly in your own life. The teaching of the two arrows. The first arrow is what happens to you. The event, the loss, the disappointment, the pain that life brings without your choice. You can't avoid that. Being human means sometimes getting hurt. But the second arrow, that one comes from within. It's the story you add after the pain, the self-blame, the rumination, the why me, the this shouldn't have happened, the what if I had done something different. And it's this second arrow that often hurts even more than the first. The Buddha taught that while we can't always control the first arrow, we can choose whether or not to fire the second. But most of us do it without even noticing. It becomes habit. A pattern so familiar, we think it's normal. A thought appears, and before we know it, we're lost in a spiral of mental narratives that multiply the pain, stretch it out, embed it deeper. This is where so much of our emotional exhaustion comes from. Not just from what we've been through, but from how long we've kept reliving it. The memory isn't just stored in the mind, it echoes in the body. And each time we replay the story with judgment or resistance, that echo grows louder. The nervous system reacts as if it's happening all over again. The heart tightens, the breath shifts, the body braces, and we don't even realize we're doing it to ourselves. Letting go of the second arrow doesn't mean denying pain. It doesn't mean pretending nothing hurt. It means not feeding the wound with stories that keep it alive. It means meeting pain with presence instead of opinion, It means feeling what's there without adding layers of interpretation, blame, or shame. This practice begins with awareness, noticing the moment you've been hit by that first arrow. Maybe someone said something that stung. Maybe you failed at something important. Maybe a plan fell apart. Whatever it is, the moment of impact can't always be avoided. But what comes after that? That's where you have power. When you catch yourself beginning to spiral, pause, come back to the body, to the sensation of breath, to the place where the pain is held physically. Instead of asking why it happened, ask yourself, what am I adding to this? What thought is making this hurt more than it has to? What meaning am I assigning that may not be true? Most of the time, we realize that the thought itself is not fact. It's an inherited belief, a habit, a fear. And in seeing that clearly, you create space. Space between the pain and the reaction. Space between the feeling and the story. And in that space, freedom starts to grow. This doesn't happen all at once. The mind will want to jump back in. It will try to pull you back into the narrative, into the loop. That's okay. Don't fight it. Just keep returning to the moment, to the body, to the truth that pain can arise without needing to be amplified. When you let go of the second arrow, you're not letting go of your humanity. You're letting go of the habit of turning every pain into a permanent identity. You're letting go of the voice that says, "This always happens to me," or "I'm not good enough," or "It's all my fault." These voices are not truth. They are echoes of past conditioning, and you are not required to believe them. This practice also teaches you emotional maturity. The kind that doesn't flinch from discomfort, but doesn't get consumed by it either. You begin to learn how to sit with grief without turning it into drama, how to sit with regret without turning it into self-loathing. You begin to relate to emotions as passing weather, not as permanent marks on who you are. And you discover that most of the peace you've been chasing doesn't come from changing your life circumstances. It comes from changing the way you relate to pain. Because life will continue to bring challenges. That's not personal. That's nature. But your inner reaction, that's where your freedom lives. Letting go of the second arrow also allows you to be with others in a more grounded way. You stop projecting your old wounds onto present moments. You stop reading between the lines where there's nothing written. You listen more carefully. You react less harshly. You learn that every emotion doesn't need a commentary. Every feeling doesn't need a fix. This is a quiet, deep discipline, a subtle kind of strength, one that no one else may ever see, but that changes your whole relationship with life. You don't need to be stoic in the sense of shutting down. You just learn not to make things heavier than they already are. You also learn that forgiveness, real forgiveness, begins here, not with the other person, with yourself. When you stop replaying the moment over and over, you free the energy that was stuck there. You start to heal without needing closure from anyone else. You begin to feel whole again because you're no longer splitting yourself between past pain and present possibility. Letting go of the second arrow doesn't mean you won't feel. It means you'll feel without getting lost. You'll grieve without collapsing. You'll hurt without turning it into a life sentence. You'll know that pain can visit, but it doesn't have to move in. It also helps you to trust yourself. When you know that you can meet pain without feeding it, you stop being afraid of it. You become resilient, not because nothing affects you, but because you no longer multiply the effect through rumination. Your heart becomes stronger because it learns to feel without drowning. And over time, you'll notice that the space between pain and reaction grows wider. You'll find yourself breathing instead of spiraling, listening instead of assuming, resting instead of reacting. And in that space, there's peace, not because life became easier, but because you became wiser. This practice of not firing the second arrow also reveals how much of our suffering comes from resistance, not just from pain itself, but from the way we argue with reality. The thought that it shouldn't have happened, the belief that it ruined everything, the fear that it will always be this way. When you let go of these thoughts, you come back to what's real. The sensation in your body, the truth of what's happening now. And almost always, the present moment is more manageable than the story your mind is telling about it. This awareness doesn't make you passive, it makes you clear. When action is needed, you take it, but from a place of wisdom, not from a place of panic. You don't speak just to defend your pain. You speak because it's time, and you do it without the extra weight of inner turmoil. Letting go of the second arrow is not a detachment from life. It's a deeper entry into it, a way of meeting each moment with clean eyes, a way of trusting that you can handle what comes without making it worse by firing arrows at yourself. It's a lifelong practice, but every time you catch yourself before the spiral, you're shifting your entire relationship with pain. You're becoming the kind of person who can hold difficulty with grace, who can face loss without losing themselves, who can meet life on its terms without being broken by it. This is not about avoiding emotion. It's about ending unnecessary suffering. And when you begin to practice it, life becomes simpler. Not because there's less to feel, but because there's less to fight. You discover that presence is the strongest form of protection, and that silence, that clear, steady silence within, is where the healing begins. And that healing isn't just yours. When you stop firing the second arrow at yourself, you stop firing it at others too. You become a source of peace, a person who can hold pain without passing it on, and that makes you not only free, but safe to be around. You no longer add to the noise. You no longer create stories that trap you. You move lightly. You speak carefully. You live gently. And maybe that's what true strength looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of self-inflicted wounds. This is how the cycle ends, and something new, something quiet and steady, begins. And once you begin to recognize the pain you add through thought, you might notice something else. The pain that was already there, sitting quietly beneath the surface, not loud, not dramatic, just a constant pull on your energy. A subtle drain you couldn't quite name. It's not just one wound, it's the accumulation, a layering of thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and habits that have been left untouched for years. The Buddha understood this inner weight well. In one of his most precise teachings, he spoke directly to it, the Sabbasava Sutta. This teaching doesn't just focus on big, obvious forms of suffering. It goes deeper. into the subtle defilements of the mind, into the quiet poison that builds over time. These mental toxins, known as the asavas, don't always announce themselves. They show up in patterns you don't even realize you're following. Patterns that keep you restless, reactive, unfulfilled, and exhausted. Even when life seems fine on the outside. The word asava can be translated as outflows or leaking taints. The concept refers to mental states that drain vital energy. They leak out through unexamined craving, delusion, wrong views, and the subtle clinging to identity. When left untreated, these outflows slowly pull the mind away from peace. Like a vessel with cracks, no matter how much stillness you pour in, it doesn't stay full. The Buddha did not simply point to these poisons. He offered specific, methodical ways to drain them. Not through suppression, not through avoidance, but through direct understanding and practice. And what makes this teaching powerful is its practicality. It acknowledges that the mind must be trained with precision because the toxins within don't always disappear just because you want them to. The first step is clear seeing, the ability to recognize what's arising, and more importantly, where it's coming from. This means catching the initial spark of a thought that leads to unwholesome reaction. For example, you might notice the urge to criticize someone, not because they've harmed you, but because it distracts from your own inner discomfort. That small thought, if unexamined, can set off a chain of harm. But if you recognize it as an asava, as a mental poison arising from habitual insecurity or desire to control, you create a gap. In that gap, awareness begins to neutralize the taint. Some asavas arise from ignorance, the kind that believes lasting peace comes from things outside the mind. The idea that one more achievement, one more person's approval, one more possession will complete you. This belief drives the constant reaching. The Buddha taught that these beliefs must be undone with investigation, not with blind faith. You ask directly, what am I really seeking? What do I think this will solve? What happens when I get it and then lose it again? The more you ask these questions, the more you see the pattern. You begin to realize that the problem is not the world. It's the way the mind relates to the world, through craving, through resistance, through clinging. You notice that every time you chase, you're running from something, and every time you run, you create more restlessness. This is where restraint becomes a form of liberation, not suppression, conscious restraint, holding the mind steady instead of letting it spill out in every direction. Not because desire is evil, but because, when it goes unquestioned, it pulls you away from yourself. You begin to see that not every impulse deserves action. Not every thought deserves a reaction. You practice pausing, not just out of discipline, but out of respect for your energy. Another method taught in the sutta is wise reflection. This means looking deeply into experience without getting pulled into it. It means asking the right questions, not from obsession, but from clarity. Questions like, is this thought leading to more peace or more turmoil? Is this habit helping me or harming me? What would happen if I didn't follow this urge? Reflection is not overthinking. It's precision. It's mental cleanliness. You remove the dust without smearing it further. Some defilements arise from habitual avoidance of pain. These are the ones that hide behind busyness, entertainment, or even spirituality. You might meditate just to escape discomfort, not to understand it. The Buddha warned against this, because what you avoid doesn't disappear. It sits in the background, quietly polluting your mind, draining your energy, until you turn toward it and see it for what it is, a temporary formation, not a monster. And when you face it directly, the mind stops leaking energy through fear. Discipline is another form of draining mental poison, not the harsh kind that demands perfection, but the steady kind that keeps you rooted. You choose simplicity. You keep precepts. Not because you're trying to be good, but because every time you act in alignment with wisdom, you stop adding more pollution. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you fracture your trust in your own clarity. That fracture leaks doubt, and doubt is a slow poison. But when you live with integrity, the mind holds steady, it doesn't leak. Guarding the senses is a key instruction in this teaching. Not cutting yourself off from life, but being mindful of what you let in. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind are pathways. And if you don't guard them, you take in more than you can digest. Too much information, too much noise, too many opinions. And eventually, the mind becomes bloated with unprocessed impressions. Guarding the senses means knowing when to look away, knowing when to stop scrolling, knowing when to sit in silence instead of filling every moment with stimulus. Some toxins arise from incorrect views, deeply held beliefs that distort reality. The view that you are your thoughts, that you are your past, that you are what others say about you. These views don't just color your experience, they shape your identity. And every time you reinforce them, you tighten the grip of suffering. But when you begin to see that these views are just mental constructions, not ultimate truths, they lose power. You don't have to believe everything you think. You can let thoughts pass like clouds without grabbing them, without building a home in them. Even speech can be a source of taint. Not just obvious harmful words, but speech that is rooted in ego, boasting, gossip, false agreement, or words said just to be liked. Every time you speak from a place that isn't true, something inside you contracts. The Buddha taught that speech should be true, kind, useful, and timely. If it's not all four, it's better to be silent, because words have energy, and unconscious speech spreads the mind's toxins outward, creating more confusion for you and others. Right livelihood is another form of detoxification. How you earn your living affects your mental state. If your work causes harm, even indirectly, that tension lives in you. You may try to ignore it, but part of you always knows. Living in alignment means choosing work that doesn't compromise your values. It means asking, am I creating something that benefits, or am I just surviving while adding to the world's suffering? The answer may not always be simple, but the question itself begins the purification process. Some defilements come from unconscious memory, residues of old events that still shape present perception. You may react to a situation not because of what's happening now, but because of a story formed years ago. These patterns must be met with patience, not force. Through gentle awareness, the mind begins to release its old grips. Through mindfulness, you see the trigger, you feel the response, and you stay with it, without indulging or repressing. This balanced presence is what heals old wounds without creating new ones. Even meditation can be misused. If the intention is wrong, if you meditate to escape or to feel superior, you only feed more taint. But when you sit to observe, to open, to learn, the practice begins to purify on its own. You begin to notice the subtleties, the way craving hides in even peaceful moments, the way ego hides in the desire to be enlightened. But you don't push it away, you just see it, and seeing clearly is the drain. The Buddha was clear. These poisons don't disappear overnight. They are worn deep, often below consciousness, but they can be weakened. They can be drained, not through magic, through practice, through attention, through care. Each time you choose wisdom over habit, the outflows lose their power. Each time you hold still, instead of reacting, the toxins settle, and over time, the mind becomes clear. Not because life stopped being difficult, but because you stopped adding pollution to what was already there. There is a soft joy in this kind of inner work. Not the sharp joy of excitement, but the gentle joy of stability, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are no longer held hostage by every thought, that your mind is becoming a place of rest, not a battlefield, that your life is becoming simpler, not because you do less, but because you carry less. And as you drain these poisons, you create space, not just for peace, but for insight, for compassion, for real joy, the kind that doesn't depend on anything, the kind that arises naturally when the mind is clean. And that joy, that peace, that clarity, it doesn't just heal you. It heals everyone you touch. Because a mind that's no longer leaking toxins is a mind that radiates light, and that light begins to spread. And as the mind begins to clear, as the hidden poisons lose their hold, you're left with a kind of stillness that feels both new and familiar. But even in this clarity, there can be questions. Why do certain feelings return so quickly? Why do some reactions still arise before you can stop them? Why do you keep getting pulled back into emotional loops? You thought you had outgrown. The Buddha pointed to a truth that cuts straight to the heart of these patterns, the law of dependent origination. This teaching is not philosophy for the sake of thought. It is a map, a direct explanation of why you suffer and how that suffering takes shape. It reveals that emotions do not appear out of nowhere. Pain does not exist in isolation. Nothing happens without a cause, and if something has a cause, it can also have an end. The law of dependent origination, or paticca samuppada, shows that every experience you have is conditioned. Not just big events, but thoughts, feelings, reactions, all arise from causes, and each cause is itself a result of something before it. When this exists, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases. This principle is not just about events outside you. It is about the inner chain that leads from perception to suffering. You might feel anxious and think that anxiety is the problem. But anxiety is a symptom. It is the result of a chain that started earlier. Maybe it began with a memory triggered by a sound. That memory gave rise to a thought. The thought led to a sensation in the body. That sensation created a reaction, a tightening, a story, a fear. And before you knew it, you were entangled in a feeling that seemed to arrive fully formed. But it didn't. It was built, step by step, inside you. This teaching allows you to trace the path in reverse, to pause at any point in the chain and see what's really happening. And once you see that emotions are not final truths, but conditional states, you stop being so controlled by them. You can observe instead of obey. You can understand instead of react. The chain often begins with ignorance, not knowing things as they truly are. From that ignorance comes habitual formation. These are the reactions you learned through repetition, ways of thinking, speaking, acting that formed without conscious choice. When these patterns are triggered, consciousness latches on. It recognizes the habit and activates a familiar track. Then name and form appear. You identify the feeling, give it a label, and treat it as solid. That labeling gives rise to the 6 sense bases, contact with the world through seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, and thinking. From contact comes feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And from feeling comes craving, the desire to hold on to pleasure, push away pain, or escape boredom. That craving leads to clinging, the mental habit of possessing, defending, controlling, and clinging creates becoming, the construction of a sense of self around the experience. This process happens rapidly, most of it beneath awareness. But when you slow down, you can see it unfolding, and that seeing changes everything. Because once you understand that what feels like you is actually a sequence of causes, you stop taking everything so personally. You stop saying, "I am angry," and instead see, anger has arisen due to conditions. You stop saying, "I am broken," and start noticing, pain has arisen because a thought was believed without question. This isn't a denial of experience, it's a deepening of understanding. It's seeing that what you feel is real but not ultimate. It is a wave, not an identity, a reaction, not a sentence. And when you understand that each part of the chain depends on the previous part, you gain power. Because if you can interrupt even one link, you break the cycle. This is where mindfulness becomes transformative. Not just as a way to calm down, but as a tool for discernment. You start to notice the exact moment contact leads to feeling. The instant feeling shifts into craving. And in that space, you can pause. You can breathe. You can let the impulse pass without fueling it. That pause isn't passive. It is a rebellion against automatic suffering. Many of your emotional struggles don't come from the first reaction. They come from feeding that reaction over and over. You replay a situation. You attach meaning. You defend it. You use it to confirm a belief about yourself or others. And that entire web of suffering began with a moment of contact that was never fully seen. Dependent origination teaches you that suffering doesn't come from experience alone. It comes from ignorance of how that experience was formed. Once you see the process, clearly, you don't need to fight every feeling. You just stop building more pain on top of it. This also changes how you relate to other people. You begin to understand that their behavior comes from their own chains of conditioned reaction, that the harsh words or cold silence you receive may have nothing to do with you personally, that what they call personality is often just layers of unexamined conditioning, and from that understanding comes compassion, not because you approve, but because you see more clearly. The law of dependent origination is not just theory. It's a lens that brings the world into focus. It shows you that even your deepest habits are not permanent. They are maintained by conditions. And if you change the conditions, the habit begins to weaken. You don't need to destroy the whole chain overnight. You just need to interrupt it. You can start anywhere, with a breath, with a question, with a choice to not react in the old way. Each time you do, you change the momentum. You stop fueling the next link. And that is how freedom begins, not with grand insight, but with quiet, repeated awareness. This teaching also frees you from the trap of blame. Because when you see how every reaction has a cause, you stop thinking in terms of good and bad. You see suffering as something that happens when wisdom is absent, not as something that happens to bad people. And that view opens a door to healing. You don't shame yourself for reacting. You study the reaction. You learn from it. You begin to meet each moment with curiosity instead of criticism. And the more you study the process, the more flexible the mind becomes. You stop getting stuck in roles. You stop saying, "I'm just this way," because you know that who you are is being created moment to moment. And that realization doesn't diminish you, it liberates you. You can become something different, not by force, but by understanding. The chain also shows why escaping doesn't work. You might try to change your environment, your job, your relationships, hoping to feel better. But if the inner chain remains unseen, the same reactions follow you. Because the trigger isn't always external, it's the mind's interpretation that creates the loop. Once you begin to see that, you start looking for freedom in the right place, not outside, but in awareness itself. This teaching is often called deep, but it's not complicated. It just requires attention. Each moment is an opportunity to witness the process at work, to feel contact without reacting, to experience feeling without grasping, to let thoughts appear without believing everyone, and slowly the chain weakens. This weakening doesn't create numbness, it creates presence. You still feel, you still live. But you are no longer a puppet pulled by unseen strings. You act with intention instead of habit. You choose your response instead of being chosen by it. That choice is not always easy, but it is always possible. The power of this teaching is that it applies to every part of life, to relationships, to work, to inner dialogue, to moments of joy and pain. It shows you that nothing is fixed, that everything arises from conditions, and that wisdom is the condition that can end suffering. You begin to see the beauty in simplicity, the strength in clarity, the peace in knowing that emotions don't need to be resisted or worshipped. They can be understood, and in that understanding, they lose their power to control you. And as you continue to observe this process, you begin to experience moments of genuine freedom. Not because you're detached, but because you're awake. You stop being a victim of inner weather. You start becoming the sky it passes through. This is not a cold distance. It's a warm presence. It allows you to be in life more fully because you're not always escaping, chasing, or avoiding. You're meeting each moment as it is, seeing the chain, seeing the choice, and trusting in the power of awareness to guide you through it. This is the quiet revolution at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Not a promise to end pain entirely, but a path to end the unnecessary chains that turn pain into lifelong suffering. And as you walk that path, you begin to see that freedom was never far away. It was just covered by habit, and now you're starting to uncover it. And as you begin to see the inner mechanics of suffering, something subtle becomes clear. The storm is not just outside you, it's also inside. Even when you understand the chain, even when you interrupt it, the world still moves, people still change, loss still happens, success fades, expectations fall apart. And so, the deeper question arises: how do you remain steady when everything around you, and sometimes within you, keeps shifting? This is where upeksha enters, a word that often gets misunderstood. Not indifference, not emotional distance, but a deep, sacred equanimity, a strength that does not flinch, a calm that does not come from ignoring pain, but from facing it with unshakable clarity. It's the kind of inner balance that doesn't depend on the outcome, a steadiness that doesn't need life to be predictable in order to be at peace. Upeksha is one of the 4 immeasurable qualities in Buddhist teachings. But unlike the obvious warmth of loving-kindness or the joy of compassion, upeksha can feel subtle, quiet, even mysterious, and yet it may be the most powerful of all, because it is what holds everything else. Without it, compassion can burn out, joy can collapse into attachment, even wisdom can become fragile. But when upeksha is present, there is a kind of stillness that nothing can break. It does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being controlled by what you feel. You can still love deeply, mourn honestly, celebrate fully, but you are not thrown off center by any of it. You are aware, awake, steady. This is not a practice of becoming cold. It is the art of remaining open without being swept away. To develop this equanimity, the first step is understanding the nature of change, not as a concept, but as a lived truth. Everything you experience, thoughts, emotions, people, events, arises and passes. Nothing lasts, nothing holds still. And when you resist this truth, suffering grows. But when you accept it, even pain softens, because you stop clinging to what cannot be held. This is where mental fatigue often comes from, the endless effort to hold life still, the constant internal fight against what is. You want things to go your way. You want people to behave according to your hopes. You want the future to be certain, and that wanting never ends, until you begin to see that it is the craving for control that exhausts you, not the chaos itself. Upeksha teaches you to stop trying to control everything, to stop managing everyone's perception of you, to stop measuring every moment against your expectations. Instead, you learn to observe, to feel fully, but with space around the feeling. to care without clinging, to give without needing to be rewarded, to act from integrity, not from the hope of specific results. This practice begins with the body, because the body is where you first notice when you're out of balance. Tight jaw, shallow breath, knotted stomach, these are signs that you're leaning too far into attachment or aversion. Equanimity brings you back to center, not by pushing emotions away, but by creating enough awareness to let them flow through you without becoming your identity. Thoughts will still arise, emotions will still surge. But with upeksha, you no longer react to every wave. You let the waves come and you let them go. This trains the mind to stay calm. Even when life feels unfair, uncertain, or unbearable, because you know that no state is permanent and that knowing gives you strength. One of the most difficult parts of this practice is letting go of the desire to fix what cannot be fixed. You can still help, you can still try, but you do it without grasping, without desperation. You learn to act with full heart and then let go. Not because you don't care, but because you understand that some things are beyond your control. This applies deeply to relationships. You love people. You want them to be happy. You want them to change in ways that reduce their suffering. But upeksha reminds you that you cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You cannot force growth. You cannot prevent another person's pain without stealing their freedom. So you hold them in compassion without losing yourself in their journey. It also applies to your own emotions. Sometimes you will feel things that don't make sense. You will have days of sadness that have no clear cause. You will lose your patience. You will forget everything you've learned. Upeksha doesn't judge that. It sees it as part of the flow, and it gently brings you back again and again to center. This quality becomes especially vital when facing injustice or deep uncertainty. It can be easy to mistake anger for strength, or to mistake numbness for peace. But true strength is found in the one who can witness pain, stay engaged, speak truth, and still remain internally undisturbed. This is not detachment from the world. It is detachment from the mind's compulsion to grasp, control, and cling. Upeksha offers a kind of spaciousness inside you, a place that is untouched by the surface-level storms of life. This is not a fantasy. It is a real, trainable capacity. You develop it by watching your reactions closely, not just during crisis, but in everyday moments. A delayed response, a disappointment, a misunderstanding. Each one is a chance to practice returning to balance, and you don't have to be perfect at it. Equanimity is not all or nothing. It grows gradually. Each time you resist the urge to lash out, each time you pause before speaking from impulse, each time you step back from mental dramatization, you strengthen the foundation of peace within you. There is a kind of dignity in upeksha, not arrogance, not spiritual superiority, but a quiet confidence that you can remain yourself no matter what happens, that you don't need to prove your worth through reaction, that you don't need life to match your plans in order to feel whole. This practice also requires humility, because you begin to see that so much of what happens is beyond your control. People leave, bodies change, minds shift, And yet, you can remain steady in your intention, steady in your practice, steady in your presence. That is power without aggression, commitment without rigidity. Upeksha allows you to move through conflict without losing compassion, to face challenge without losing patience, to feel sorrow without drowning in it. It teaches you that peace is not passive, it is fierce in its refusal to collapse. This doesn't mean you stop speaking truth. It means you speak with balance, not to win, not to hurt, but to bring clarity, to protect what matters. And then you let go of the need to control how your words are received, because your value is not determined by anyone's reaction. The more you practice equanimity, the more you see that most suffering comes from over-identifying with the temporary. You mistake a bad moment for a bad life. You mistake a harsh word for a permanent identity. Upeksha pulls you out of that narrow view. It shows you the bigger sky behind the clouds. This way of being does not require isolation. You don't have to leave your life to cultivate it. You can practice upeksha in the middle of the world, in conversations, in meetings, in waiting rooms, in grief, in joy. It's a posture of inner openness, holding all experience, gently without sinking into any of it. You might be surprised how often this quality calms others too. When you stop reacting, others begin to feel safe around you, not judged, not pushed, just met with presence. This is a form of healing, a kind of medicine you offer by your very way of being. Upeksha doesn't solve every problem, but it changes your relationship to every problem. Instead of being pulled by emotion, you're guided by insight. Instead of being tied to outcome, you're anchored in intention. And that makes everything lighter. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer at war with it. Even in your own mind, you learn to let thoughts come and go without chasing them, without believing every urge. You see the movement of mind without getting stuck inside it. This doesn't numb you, it frees you. Equanimity is what gives you the strength to be still when everything is in motion, to stay soft when everything calls you to harden, to stay clear when everything around you is confused. This is not a mood. It is a muscle, one that grows with practice, with presence, with patience. And as that muscle grows, you begin to realize that peace was never fragile. It was always there, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the habitual grasping, beneath the fear. And now you're beginning to rest there, not above the world, but fully in it, balanced, calm, awake. This is the strength of upeksha, and it's already within you. And as you grow into that steady inner balance, you might begin to hear something faint beneath the calm, a quiet voice asking if you're someone you can trust, not in crisis, not in success, but in the ordinary moments, the ones no one sees, when the pressure is off, when no one is watching. There's a kind of honesty that lives there. And if it's broken, even slightly, peace cannot fully settle. Equanimity shows you how to remain steady, but it's integrity that makes that steadiness real. Without integrity, you always doubt yourself. You second-guess your motives. You carry the weight of regret, even when you try to stay present. The mind can't fully relax in a body that doesn't trust itself. And that's why the Buddha pointed to something simple, practical, and powerful: the 5 precepts. These precepts are not rules given by an authority. They are commitments you make to yourself. They are not about punishment or fear. They are a way of living that protects your clarity, your relationships, and your ability to rest in your own presence without guilt. When you honor them, you begin to rebuild a kind of inner safety that no outside success can replace. The first precept is a commitment to non-harming, not killing in action, not wounding in words, not attacking in thought. This is the foundation of a mind that feels safe within itself, because every time you hurt another, directly or indirectly, you register that violence inwardly, even if you justify it. It creates a disturbance that echoes later as anxiety, shame, or restlessness. Choosing non-harm isn't just a gift to others. It's how you stop creating more inner conflict. This precept also teaches restraint in small moments, choosing not to swat at a bug, in annoyance, not raising your voice, just to feel powerful, not using words as weapons when you're hurt. You begin to see that every moment of restraint strengthens the ground beneath you. It feeds self-respect in a way that feels quiet but deeply fulfilling. The second precept is not taking what is not freely given. This is about more than theft. It's about respecting boundaries, respecting consent, not taking time, energy, or attention that isn't freely offered. It's also about letting go of entitlement, the belief that you deserve something just because you want it. This precept helps heal the part of you that grabs at life out of scarcity. When you begin to live by this, you stop reaching from fear. You begin to receive with gratitude instead of demand. You start noticing when you're consuming more than you need, whether it's things, information, or even emotional support from others. You learn to ask instead of assume, to wait instead of push, and that waiting builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. The third precept is about wise sexual conduct. At its core, it's a call to honor. Connection without using desire as a weapon or a mask. It's about refusing to manipulate, lie, or mislead in order to satisfy an urge. Because when desire becomes more important than respect, it leaves damage. And even if you don't see that damage immediately, the heart knows. The mind carries it. Living with sexual integrity doesn't mean repression. It means clarity. It means staying true in word and action, not promising what you can't hold, not hiding behind charm or flattery, not using others as a way to escape yourself. When you align with this precept, you begin to feel clean inside your body. You move through relationships without carrying residue. You heal the part of you that used intimacy as a way to avoid loneliness. The fourth precept is about truthful speech. This one runs deep, because so much of daily conversation is shaped by fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being wrong, fear of not being enough. And so we embellish, we omit, we say what we think others want to hear. We speak to be liked instead of speaking to be honest. And every time you do that, even slightly, you lose a bit of your inner ground. Truthful speech doesn't mean brutal honesty. It means speaking from a place that doesn't hide, a place that doesn't twist or distort reality. It also means knowing when silence is more compassionate than words. When words are unnecessary. It's speaking with care, precision, and heart. And most of all, it's speaking in a way that lets you sleep peacefully at night. Not because you always say the right thing, but because you don't have to untangle a web of half-truths. This precept heals emotional fragmentation. It unifies the inner and outer self. Because when your words match your heart, you no longer feel divided. You stop feeling like an imposter in your own life. You start moving through the world without needing to perform. The fifth precept is about clarity of mind, abstaining from intoxicants that cloud judgment or create carelessness. It's not just about alcohol or substances. It's about anything that numbs, escapes, or dulls awareness. Anything that you use to avoid feeling. Even excessive stimulation, constant noise, or mindless scrolling can become intoxicants when used to disconnect. This precept is about presence. Choosing to stay with what's real, even when it's uncomfortable. Choosing to protect your capacity for insight over the temporary relief of numbing. When you live by this, you start to notice the difference between real joy and escapism. Between peace and just not feeling anything. You rebuild your ability to be with life as it is. Fully. Awake. Unaltered. Each of these precepts is a form of inner repair, a way of realigning with the part of you that knows how to live cleanly, how to care without needing to be controlled by urges, how to rest without regret, how to move through the world without leaving harm behind you. And what you gain from this is not moral superiority, it's not perfection. What you gain is trust. A trust that grows quietly, day by day. You begin to believe yourself again. You begin to know that when you make a promise, you'll keep it. When you say something, it's true. When you feel something, you don't have to hide it behind a mask. This inner trust changes everything. It reduces anxiety because you're no longer waiting for a lie to catch up to you. It heals shame because you're no longer pretending. It softens guilt because you're living in a way that aligns with your deeper values. And that alignment feels like rest, like finally coming home to yourself. It also changes how you relate to others. People start to feel safe around you. Not because you're always agreeable, but because you're consistent. Because your actions match your words. Because your presence feels grounded, not slippery. And that safety is rare. It's healing. It's a gift you offer by simply being honest and kind. This path isn't always easy. You will slip. You will forget. You will say things you regret. But the point isn't perfection. It's returning. Returning again and again to what matters. Each time you do, the mind settles a little more. The heart opens a little wider. The guilt softens. The inner war begins to end. And over time, the precepts become less about what you can't do and more about what you no longer want to do. You no longer want to hurt. You no longer want to hide. You no longer want to carry the heavy energy of dishonesty, harm, or greed. You start wanting peace more than you want control. And that wanting becomes a new kind of discipline, not forced, not fear-based, but rooted in care, in clarity, in the quiet joy of living without conflict. This is not about spiritual identity. It's about inner simplicity. Living in a way that lets you look at yourself honestly without turning away. Not because you're proud, but because you're at peace. That peace doesn't come from external achievement. It comes from knowing you're not lying to yourself anymore. That you don't have to keep justifying behavior that feels misaligned. That you can rest in your own integrity without needing anyone else to approve of it. This is how the precepts work, not as rules imposed from the outside, but as commitments that clean the inside, that clear the dust from the mirror, that let you see your own face again without flinching. And in that seeing, you begin to trust life again. Not because it's predictable, but because you know that whatever happens, you will meet it honestly, gently, with care. This trust is what builds the foundation for everything else. Meditation deepens, relationships strengthen, anxiety lessens, and confidence rises. Not the kind that comes from performance, but the kind that comes from wholeness. You no longer feel fragmented. You no longer feel like you have to keep hiding parts of yourself just to be okay. You start to live fully, with a heart that's clean, with a mind that's steady, with a life that feels true. And that feeling, that quiet confidence that comes from ethical living, it's not just the result of practice, it is the practice. And as you begin to feel the quiet strength of living in integrity, something starts to shift inside. Not just a release of guilt, but a deep sense of wholeness that doesn't come from holding on, but from letting go. You start to notice that real security isn't found in what you keep. It's in what you give freely. When you stop trying to prove yourself through accumulation, you open a door into a kind of wealth that has nothing to do with possession. This is where the practice of dana begins to work its alchemy. Dana means giving, but it's not the kind of giving that comes with expectation or hidden motives. It's not transactional. It's not a strategy to appear good. True dana is a radical act of letting go. It's a practice that cuts through scarcity thinking. It undoes the deep, silent belief that you're not enough, that you don't have enough, that there's not enough to go around. Because that belief doesn't just limit your generosity, it keeps you exhausted. Most people don't realize how much energy they spend protecting what they fear to lose. Time, money, praise, recognition, love. The clutching creates tension. It turns life into a constant calculation. But when you practice dana, something reverses. Instead of asking, "What can I get?" you start asking, "What can I offer?" And that simple shift changes everything. This isn't about grand gestures. Dana can be small. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a moment of undivided attention. The value isn't in the size, it's in the spirit. Giving without needing to control the outcome, without needing to be seen as generous, without using generosity as a way to strengthen the self. Dana isn't about building a better version of ego. It's about letting ego rest. When you give from this space, there's no exhaustion. Because you're not giving to prove anything. You're giving because you've touched something inside that knows abundance doesn't come from what you hold. It comes from what you're willing to release. The Buddha taught that dana is the first perfection for a reason. Without it, you can't truly walk the path. Because as long as you're clinging, you're bound. Scarcity doesn't only show up as financial fear. It shows up as hoarding your time, withholding your presence, measuring your kindness based on how much you think others deserve it. True giving isn't conditional, and that's why it's freeing. It releases you from the constant inner commentary that tries to keep score. You start to notice that real giving is silent. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for recognition. It's just an expression of trust. Trust that you are already whole, that you don't lose by offering, you expand. This trust grows each time you give without grasping. And slowly, you begin to heal from the mental patterns that kept you small. You stop living like there's a ledger in your heart, measuring every exchange. You stop living like you have to earn the right to be generous. The mind that is rooted in dana is a mind that feels light, because it isn't carrying the weight of self-centeredness. And that doesn't mean you stop caring for yourself. It means you begin to see that caring for others doesn't diminish you. It nourishes you in a way that consuming never could. You learn to give even when you don't feel grand. You learn that waiting until you have enough often means never giving at all, because the feeling of lack doesn't go away through accumulation. It goes away through letting go, through proving to yourself again and again that you can survive without clinging. Dana creates space. It breaks the cycle of fear that says, if I give, I'll be left with nothing. Instead, you discover that giving opens a flow, and what moves through you heals you. The act of offering creates connection. It softens separation. It undoes the hardness that builds when you spend your life protecting your image, your reputation, your resources. You begin to see that giving is not about being good. It's about being free. It's a gesture of trust in life. A way of saying, I don't have to hold everything in my fists to feel safe. And in that trust, you discover a new kind of energy, one that isn't drained by fear, but replenished through connection. Sometimes you'll give and receive nothing in return. Not a word of thanks. Not even acknowledgement. That's when the ego tries to intervene. It says, you've been taken advantage of. But dana isn't about being noticed. It's about releasing the need to be noticed. That release is what sets you free. In a world that often measures worth by what you own, dana becomes a subtle rebellion. A quiet statement that you will not be defined by what you accumulate. That your value isn't in what you possess, but in what you're willing to share. Even if all you can offer is patience, a listening ear, a moment of stillness for someone who's struggling. This practice changes your relationship to resources. You stop hoarding. You stop living from the mindset that there will never be enough. You stop defining generosity as something you'll do later when you finally feel secure. You begin now. You start small. You let the practice shape you, and that shaping begins internally. You begin to give yourself the same spirit of dana, the benefit of the doubt, the space to breathe, the permission to rest without earning it, the kindness to let go of perfectionism. Self-generosity is not self-indulgence. It's the willingness to stop punishing yourself as a way to earn worth. The more you practice giving without expectation, the more you start to receive life differently. A sunset feels like a gift. A breath feels like abundance. A moment of silence feels like overflow. You stop waiting for big rewards to feel blessed. You start seeing the ordinary as more than enough. And something else begins to fade. The exhaustion of always performing, always competing, always trying to stay ahead. When you give from the heart, not from strategy, you exit the game of comparison. You're no longer giving to be seen as generous. You're just giving because you're no longer bound by fear. This doesn't mean you let yourself be used. Dana doesn't ignore wisdom. You still set boundaries. You still say no when needed. But the no doesn't come from scarcity. It comes from balance, from care, from the deep understanding that you're not responsible for saving the world. You're just here to lighten the load where you can. And in that simple offering, a kind word, a pause, a smile, you become a source of ease in a world that's starving for it. Not because you have everything together, but because you've stopped letting the ego run your life. There's a kind of joy that comes with this practice. A lightness, not loud, but steady. It comes from knowing that you're no longer trapped by the fear of not having enough. It comes from experiencing firsthand that the more you give, the less you feel you're missing. Dana is not just about altruism. It's about liberation. The release of the heavy, gripping mind that believes it must always protect, prove, and possess. It's the mind that can never rest because it's always guarding its worth. When you let go of that guarding, something deep softens, and that softness feels like home. You no longer ask, "What do I deserve?" You start asking, "What can I offer?" And in that question, your life changes. You stop measuring. You start flowing. You stop contracting. You start expanding. And the expansion doesn't come from doing more. It comes from releasing what's been blocking the heart. Scarcity, fear, ego, the quiet belief that you must prove your existence by holding tight to everything. You start to see that real generosity has nothing to do with how much you have. It has everything to do with how willing you are to be free. Free from the narrative that you're always one step away from enough. Free from the fear that if you give, you'll disappear. You won't disappear. You'll wake up, because giving is not a loss. It's a return. And as you begin to give freely, without grasping, without needing recognition, you may notice something unexpected. The heart feels lighter, but the body still carries a certain restlessness. Not anxiety in the obvious sense, but a deep, subtle unease that lingers just beneath the skin. Even when the mind is clear and the intentions are pure, the body remembers. It stores everything you've tried to let go of. And this is where stillness isn't always enough. Sometimes the body needs to move in order to heal, and that's when walking becomes medicine. Walking meditation is one of the simplest, most overlooked practices in Buddhist tradition. It's not about exercise. It's not about reaching a destination. It's a way of returning the body to the present moment, one step at a time. This practice isn't an escape from daily life. It's a way of entering it fully through the ground beneath your feet. Most people carry their minds far ahead of their bodies. You think while you walk. You plan. You rehearse conversations. You ruminate. The body is moving, but the mind is somewhere else entirely. Walking meditation reconnects these two. It rebuilds the relationship between breath, step, and awareness, and that simple return can bring a peace that sitting meditation sometimes cannot reach. When you walk with full presence, the mind begins to mirror the pace of the body. It slows, it softens, it lets go of urgency. Each step becomes a statement. I am here, I am safe, I am awake. And that statement isn't spoken, it's felt, deeply, consistently, from the ground up. This practice can be done anywhere. A quiet path, a hallway, a room. You don't need special clothing or a beautiful landscape. What you need is a willingness to pay attention, to let the feet lead the mind instead of the other way around. You begin by standing still, not rigid but grounded, feeling the weight of your body distribute evenly, letting the arms rest, letting the face soften, breathing naturally, not trying to calm the breath, just noticing it. Then, when you feel ready, you take a step, slowly, mindfully, noticing the lifting of the foot, the movement through space, the contact with the ground, and then another step, and another. Nothing fancy, just this. What happens in these steps is subtle but deep. The nervous system begins to reset because you're no longer sending it mixed messages. You're no longer moving quickly with a mind full of chaos. You're aligning speed, intention, and awareness. And that alignment tells the body it's safe, that it doesn't have to brace anymore, that it can let go. The healing comes not just from the movement, but from the intimacy with movement. You start to feel the way your body has been carrying tension in hidden places. The jaw, the neck, the lower back. And without needing to fix anything, that awareness alone begins to release what's been held. This kind of walking has nothing to do with destination. You're not walking to get somewhere. You're walking to be where you already are. That shift in purpose changes the whole experience. You don't rush. You don't lean forward. You don't chase a future moment. You rest in each step as if it were enough. And over time, you realize it is. Many emotional patterns are stored in the body as unfinished movement. Trauma, anxiety, grief. These are not just mental states. They are physical, and walking meditation allows them to be felt in a gentle way, a way that doesn't overwhelm, a way that offers space instead of pressure. You may notice thoughts arise while you walk. That's not a problem. You don't need to clear the mind completely. You just let the thought arise and return to the step. Again and again, with patience, with curiosity, with the understanding that the return is the practice, not the perfection. Some days, your steps will feel heavy. Some days, they will flow. Some days, the mind will resist slowing down. Some days, you will find unexpected tears rising as you walk. Let all of it be there. This practice is not about controlling experience. It's about making space for it to unfold naturally. When you bring kind attention to each step, you're teaching the mind a new pattern. One that doesn't rely on escaping the moment, but on fully entering it. This pattern begins to spread into the rest of your life. You walk differently in the world. You move through rooms with presence. You enter conversations without losing yourself. You feel grounded even in uncertain situations. Over time, walking meditation becomes a kind of anchor, a way to reconnect with yourself when you feel lost, a way to return to the body when you're pulled into thought, a way to feel stable in a world that often moves too fast. This practice can also be done in silence with others. Walking together in a shared rhythm without words can build a sense of connection that goes beyond language. It builds community rooted in presence. A shared commitment to move slowly. In a culture that glorifies speed, you may begin to notice the world differently while you walk. The texture of the ground, the rhythm of your breath, the way the light moves across the wall. Details that usually go unnoticed suddenly feel alive. This kind of awareness feeds the heart. It reminds you that beauty was never missing, just overlooked. And through this practice, the mind learns that it doesn't need to race ahead, that it doesn't need to solve every problem right now, that it's allowed to rest even while the body moves. This rest is not laziness. It's healing. It's a return to natural pace, to a way of being that doesn't burn out or collapse. There's a quiet dignity in walking this way. You no longer walk to escape. You walk to feel, to connect, to settle. The simplicity is what makes it so powerful. You don't need to add anything. You don't need to achieve a state. You just need to show up, step by step, breath by breath. This is also a practice of non-resistance. When you walk without a goal, you let go of the mind's habit of always needing something more. You begin to trust that this step, right here, can be enough, and that trust builds a kind of confidence that has nothing to do with control. As the practice deepens, walking becomes prayer. Not in the religious sense, but in the way each step becomes a gesture of reverence for the body, for the moment, for the life moving through you. You begin to feel that even the most ordinary movement can be sacred when done with full attention. This practice is especially supportive when you're in grief or anxiety or deep uncertainty. When sitting feels too still and the mind is loud, walking gives the energy a pathway. It offers motion without distraction, stillness without stagnation. It becomes a bridge between feeling and healing. You can practice indoors, outdoors, slowly around your home, in a hospital hallway, in a garden, in a place of noise or quiet. The environment isn't what matters. What matters is the quality of presence you bring, the willingness to feel each step fully, to let that be enough. This practice also heals the disconnect between mind and body that modern life encourages. When you're always in thought, the body becomes a vehicle you forget to check in with. Walking meditation rebuilds that relationship. It brings you back into dialogue with the physical self. And that dialogue is where so much healing begins. You learn to listen to the subtle signals: fatigue, tension, warmth, resistance. You learn to move with the body instead of against it. This builds trust, not just in the body, but in yourself. You realize that presence is not something you chase. It's something you return to, step after step. And over time, the practice begins to change the way you meet life. You respond with more patience, more kindness, less urgency. Not because you've forced calm, but because you've trained in it, quietly, through every deliberate step. Walking meditation may seem simple, but simplicity is often the most radical medicine. It asks nothing from you except to be where you are, to walk slowly enough that the heart can catch up, to let the nervous system release what it's been holding, to let the mind rest in movement, to let the body remember that it belongs to the present. This is a kind of healing that doesn't require understanding every emotion or fixing every thought. It only asks that you move with presence, that you let the earth support you, that you let each step be a return. And as you walk, something softens, not because you escaped the world, but because you finally came home to it. And as your feet return again and again to the ground beneath you, something quieter begins to rise within, a subtle sense that the body is starting to trust you, not just because you've slowed down, but because you've chosen to stay. Presence has taken root. But even so, there's a layer beneath the movement, a rhythm that runs deeper than thought or step. It's the breath, always there, always moving, always offering a way back. And when you learn to meet it fully, not just automatically but consciously, it becomes one of the most powerful medicines you have. This is the heart of Anapanasati. Anapanasati means mindfulness of breathing. It's a foundational practice in Buddhist teaching, but its power often goes unseen because of its simplicity. You breathe every day without thinking. But when you bring awareness to the breath, something fundamental changes. It stops being background noise. It becomes a pathway, a way to rewire the nervous system, to rebuild safety, to heal what words cannot touch. Breathing is the only function in the body that operates both automatically and voluntarily. That duality is not just biological, it's spiritual. It means that even when you feel powerless, there is always something within you that you can choose to return to. You can't always change your circumstances or the emotions that rise, but you can breathe with them, and that act alone begins to transform the experience. Stress alters the breath without you realizing. It shortens it, tightens it, lifts it into the chest. Over time, this shallow pattern becomes habit. The body starts to live as if it's always preparing for attack. Even when there's no threat, the nervous system doesn't know how to settle. This is why so many people struggle to relax, because relaxation isn't something you tell the mind to do. It's something you invite through the breath. Anapanasati begins with simply noticing. You sit or lie down, not to force calm, but to witness the natural movement of air in and out. You feel the breath entering through the nose, expanding the lungs, and you feel it leave. You don't try to control it, you just watch, over and over, until watching becomes merging, until the observer and the breath begin to feel like one seamless experience. This may seem small, but what you're actually doing is teaching the body that it can be a place of safety again. You're interrupting the automatic patterns that keep you in survival mode. You're sending a message to the brain that it's okay to rest. And that message, repeated over time, begins to rewrite the way you relate to stress. There are many layers to this practice. After observing the breath, The Buddha taught that you begin to notice the body, how the breath affects it, where it feels smooth, where it feels blocked. You learn to breathe with the whole body, not just the lungs. You let the inhale massage the tension. You let the exhale release it. As the practice deepens, the breath becomes a mirror. It reflects the state of the mind with utter honesty. When you're distracted, it scatters. When you're angry, it presses. When you're afraid, it halts. You don't need to judge any of this. You just notice. And that noticing creates space, the kind of space that begins to soften trauma without needing to drag it all into conscious thought. One of the most overlooked truths about healing is that the body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Events you thought were long gone can still be echoing in the breath. A sudden tightness in the chest. A shallow inhale when you see a certain face. These are not faults, they're messages. The breath is telling you where pain still lives when you sit with the breath. In these moments, without running, without numbing, without trying to fix, something opens. The body begins to trust that it doesn't have to brace forever. The fear loosens its grip, not all at once, but gently, through repetition, through care. This practice isn't about controlling the breath into perfection. It's about re-establishing a relationship with it. You don't push it to be calm. You meet it as it is. And slowly, it begins to settle on its own. Like a child who cries loudly until they know you're truly listening. When the mind wanders, and it will, you bring it back to the breath. Without harshness, without frustration. Just a simple return. This return is not a failure. It's the core of the practice. Each time you come back, you strengthen your capacity to be with life instead of escaping it. As awareness deepens, you start to notice the subtle differences between breathing from fear and breathing from presence. The fear breath is rushed, uneven, stuck. The present breath is gentle, even if it's still shaky. It carries a kind of soft courage, a willingness to stay. And in this willingness, the breath begins to heal more than just the nervous system. It begins to reach the heart, the places that have closed, the places that forgot what it means to trust. As you breathe, you're not just moving air, you're moving energy. You're allowing what was frozen to begin flowing again. This practice can be done anywhere. In a chair, on a cushion, lying down before sleep, standing at a window. The external posture doesn't matter as much as the internal attention. You're training the mind to anchor into something that doesn't change every few seconds, something that doesn't judge you, something that never leaves. Over time, Anapanasati becomes more than a practice. It becomes a companion. When anxiety rises, you don't have to panic. You don't have to believe the story it brings. You can breathe with it, sit next to it, let it come, let it pass. The breath doesn't push emotion away. It holds it until it dissolves naturally. The Buddha didn't teach breath awareness as just a stress relief technique. He taught it as a path to insight. Because when the mind is settled, it sees clearly. It sees that most suffering comes from struggling against what already is. The breath teaches you a different way, to be with what's happening without adding tension, without adding story. Even in painful moments, this practice offers a refuge. You may not be able to fix the situation, but you can breathe. And that simple act becomes a lifeline, a signal to the body that it's allowed to soften, a signal to the mind that it doesn't have to be at war with itself. You start to see that breath isn't just air. It's a bridge between reaction and response, between mind and body, between emotion and awareness. Each time you cross that bridge, you become less controlled by habit, more rooted in clarity. This clarity doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's just the space to pause before saying something you'll regret. The space to feel sadness without drowning in it. The space to rest, even when life is demanding more. You realize that many of the things you were trying to solve with thought were actually asking to be met with breath. Because thought moves in circles, breath moves in waves, and waves carry things out that circles keep spinning. There is a kind of humility that grows in this practice. You stop trying to master life. You stop trying to figure everything out right now. You start letting the body show you what it needs. You start listening more than directing. And as you listen, you find that the breath has been speaking all along, telling you when you were tense, when you were disconnected, when you needed to rest, when you were ready to feel. You just didn't know how to hear it yet. Now you're learning, and that learning doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in the quiet, the soft return to this breath. This one, right here. The breath that doesn't ask you to be better. The breath that doesn't care what you accomplished today. The breath that says simply, gently, you are alive, you are here, and that's enough. This is not just breathing. This is healing. And as the breath begins to guide you back to a place of safety, within, you start to notice something else. No healing path is walked alone. Even when the journey is inward, even when the work is deeply personal, there are moments you can't carry yourself. Moments when silence feels too heavy, when awareness needs to be held, not just practiced. This is when a certain kind of presence becomes essential. Not a teacher, not a healer, but a noble friend. Someone who doesn't rescue you, but reminds you who you are when you forget. In the Buddhist path, this role is known as Kalyana Mittata, spiritual friendship. A concept so quietly powerful that the Buddha once said, it is not half of the path, but the whole of it. These are the people who walk beside you with stillness in their hearts and honesty in their words. They don't try to fix your suffering. They don't offer solutions before listening. They offer something rarer, a steady reflection of your own wisdom, especially when you feel like you've lost it. These friendships are not formed through convenience or common interests. They are rooted in shared values. They are less about personality, compatibility, and more about integrity, presence, and truth. A noble friend is someone who calls you in rather than calling you out, who speaks with directness but never with the intention to harm, who sees your flaws and doesn't turn away. This kind of connection begins with the willingness to be seen, and that is not easy, especially for those who have been hurt by connection in the past. But without that vulnerability, the heart remains walled, and behind that wall, healing can only go so far. You may find peace in silence. You may settle through breath, but without being met in your full humanity. By another, there is often a sense that something's missing, because healing is not just about regulation, it's about relationship. Kalyana Mitata is not about emotional dependence, it's about mutual support in the deepest sense. A noble friend doesn't carry you. They walk beside you until you can carry yourself again. They don't feed your delusions. They gently expose them. They do so without superiority because they know the work is mutual. They are not above you. They are with you. One of the most important functions of a noble friend is reflection. When you are lost in self-doubt or harsh judgment, they reflect a clearer image of you than your mind can offer in that moment. They help you remember your commitments when you are tempted to abandon them. They remind you of what is true when fear tries to redefine reality. These relationships are not based on intensity or drama. In fact, they are often marked by a steady kindness, a reliability that feels rare in a world where so many connections are fleeting. A noble friend shows up when it's difficult, not just when it's comfortable. They stay through the long pauses. They listen to what you don't say. And just as you receive that kind of support, you also offer it. That's what makes the friendship noble. It's not one-sided. It's a living exchange, a mutual commitment to growth, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because true spiritual friendship is not about agreement, it's about alignment, not of opinion, but of intention. These friendships require effort. They don't appear without nourishment. They're built over time, through honest conversations, through moments of quiet understanding, through shared silence that doesn't feel awkward, through the unspoken trust that even in disagreement there is care. Many people have friends who can distract them from pain. Few have friends who can sit with them in it. Many have acquaintances who will tell them what they want to hear. Few have companions who will tell them what they need to hear, gently, with love, and without ego. To cultivate this kind of relationship, you must be willing to show up differently. You must listen not just to respond, but to understand. You must offer presence without needing recognition. You must learn to hold space instead of filling it. This requires maturity. It requires self-awareness. It requires the willingness to let go of performance and be real. Sometimes a noble friend is someone who enters your life briefly but leaves a lasting mark. Sometimes they are lifelong companions. Sometimes they appear in teachers, sometimes in strangers. What matters is the quality of the connection, the way it opens you, grounds you, challenges you to be more honest with yourself. These connections can't be forced, but they can be invited. By living with integrity, by practicing generosity, by being willing to receive as much as you give, you attract noble friends by becoming one, by speaking with care, by listening with patience, by honoring boundaries, by staying centered in what matters. In difficult times, these friendships act as anchors, not because they remove the storm, but because they offer a steady presence in it. They help you stay connected to your practice when emotion tries to pull you away. They remind you of what you're committed to becoming, even when you forget. And in moments of joy, they reflect it back without jealousy. They rejoice in your growth. They celebrate your insight. They don't feel threatened by your strength. They feel inspired by it. Because the bond isn't built on competition, it's built on a shared desire to be awake. These friendships teach you that you don't need to walk the path alone to be authentic. That solitude and connection can coexist. That silence is not broken by presence. It is deepened by it. And that sometimes the most powerful form of support isn't advice. It's sitting beside someone and saying nothing at all. They also remind you that you are worthy of being supported, that you don't have to earn the right to be met with compassion, that your struggles don't make you a burden, they make you human, and that humanity is what connects you, not what separates you. Kalyana Mittata is not just a concept. It's a way of living. It's choosing to be someone who walks with others, not ahead of them. It's letting go of superiority and surrendering to mutual respect. It's offering guidance without attachment. It's being honest without being harsh. It's standing with someone in silence. When words would only diminish the depth of what's being felt. And over time, you begin to see that the presence of noble friends does more than comfort you. It transforms you. It helps you trust again. It helps you heal from past relationships that weren't safe. It gives you a new standard for what connection can look like. Not transactional, but transformational. These friendships become a mirror for your practice. They show you where you're growing and where you're still holding back. They reflect the parts of you that need softening and the parts that are stronger than you realized. As you walk this path, you may notice that your heart opens not just to one or two people, but to the whole world. The more you are met with compassion, the more you begin to offer it naturally. The more you are heard without judgment, the more you learn to listen with that same generosity. You stop needing to defend yourself so much, because you know you are already held. You don't have to prove you're worthy, because worthiness is no longer a question. It's a felt truth that arises in the presence of real connection. And that feeling, the safety of being met, the power of being seen, the quiet grace of being walked with, it's not just comforting, it's sacred. And after being met, in silence, after feeling the steady ground of noble friendship, a new question begins to emerge quietly in the heart. If all things are changing, if even connection is impermanent, what can be truly held? What lasts when forms fade? Where does one rest when nothing outside can be depended on forever? It is here that the teachings turn inward to a place most misunderstood, most feared, and yet most freeing, the teaching of emptiness. Shunyata. This word often causes discomfort at first, because the mind thinks emptiness means loss. It thinks it means a void, meaninglessness, absence. But shunyata is not that kind of emptiness. It's not the cold darkness of nothingness. It's the quiet space out of which everything rises. It's not the erasing of life. It's the releasing of illusion. When the Buddha spoke of emptiness, he was pointing to the nature of reality as it actually is. Interconnected, unfixed, not possessed by a separate self. Every thought, every emotion, every experience arises dependent on conditions. Nothing exists alone. Nothing exists in the way the mind assumes it does. And this realization, rather than causing despair, becomes a refuge. Because what is not fixed cannot trap you. What is not possessed cannot be taken from you. The feeling of fatigue that lives beneath the surface of many lives often comes from grasping. Grasping at identity, at success, at relationships, at beliefs. The mind clings to forms and demands that they stay the same. It builds structures out of stories. But these structures are heavy, and when they inevitably shift, the cracks appear. That cracking isn't the problem, the clinging is. And emptiness teaches you how to stop building what will inevitably fall. Understanding shunyata doesn't mean denying the world. It means seeing the world more clearly. A tree is still a tree. A sound still has meaning. A person still matters. But you begin to see that these things don't exist in isolation. They are formed through causes, through time, through interdependence, and because they are formed, they can change, and because they can change, you don't have to panic when they do. This realization begins slowly. Often, in moments of disappointment, when something you relied on fails, the mind wants to collapse into despair. But a different insight begins to whisper, this too was empty of permanence, not meaningless, but unfixed. That whisper, if heard, begins to soften the fear. As you deepen in practice, you begin to watch the mind more closely. You see it construct labels. Me, mine, always, never, good, bad. And you begin to see that these labels aren't reality. They're filters. The mind uses them to feel safe, but they create distance from what's real. Shunyata asks you to put the labels down and look again, not through thought, but through presence. There is a tremendous peace that comes from not needing everything to fit into a story, from not defending every feeling, from not protecting every belief. When you let things be as they are, without attaching identity to them, the exhaustion lessens. You begin to feel light, not because life is always easy, but because you've stopped trying to freeze what was never still. Many mistake this teaching for detachment. They think emptiness means a life without emotion, but it's the opposite. When you understand emptiness, you can feel fully, because you know that no feeling has to define you. Grief can move through you without becoming your name. Anger can rise without becoming your home. Joy can blossom without becoming your goal. This openness creates room for everything, and when there's room, there's less struggle. Emptiness doesn't erase experience, it makes it spacious. You learn to say, this too, instead of, only this. You stop pushing things away, you stop holding on too tightly. You rest in the flow instead of trying to dam the river. One of the most practical implications of shunyata is the release of self-fixation. The belief that there is a solid, unchanging you that must be defended, promoted, improved, or protected at all costs. This belief is the source of so much inner conflict, because the self, as the mind understands, it is a collection of stories, roles, memories, and labels. But when you look closely, there's nothing solid there. Just movement, just change, just life flowing through a particular set of conditions. This isn't something to fear, it's something to welcome. Because when you let go of the need to be a fixed someone, you become available to what is actually here. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of defend. You love without grabbing. You exist without needing to be important. Shunyata also loosens the grip of shame. Shame is often built on the idea that who you are is fundamentally flawed. But when you see that the you you're shaming doesn't actually exist, as a solid thing, the entire structure begins to collapse. The feelings may still arise, but they no longer have a concrete object to attach to. They pass, and in their passing, space returns. This space is the gift of emptiness, not a void, but a field. A place where possibility is greater than fixation, where identity is fluid, where peace isn't dependent on circumstances. Even in times of crisis, this teaching offers relief. When things fall apart, you don't have to fall apart with them. You can grieve, you can feel, but you don't have to collapse into the story that everything is broken forever. You know that change is built into the fabric of reality, and that knowing carries you. When you live with this understanding, the mind softens. It no longer needs everything to be predictable. It no longer fears change as a threat. It sees change as nature, as truth, as something to dance with rather than run from. You also begin to trust silence more. Because in silence, there are no forms to cling to, no narratives to build, just presence, just awareness, just the empty field from which everything comes and to which everything returns. And that field is not cold, it is alive, it is intimate, it is yours and not yours at the same time. This perspective doesn't eliminate the world, it illuminates it. It allows you to be in the world without being possessed by it, to move through roles without believing they define you, to meet people without needing them to validate you. It's a quiet revolution, a gentle but radical shift in how you hold reality, from gripping to letting, from defining to observing, from being somebody to simply being. And from that place, life starts to feel different. Not because it changed, but because you're no longer holding it so tightly. You're letting it breathe, letting it be empty of everything you tried to make it mean. And in that emptiness, you find what you could never find through striving. Not meaning built on story, but peace that needs no explanation. And once you've touched the space of emptiness, not as a concept, but as a lived truth, something inside begins to shift permanently. The mind no longer needs to hold so tightly. The heart begins to rest more easily. But beneath that stillness, there's something else that begins to surface. A question that echoes quietly. If I am not this identity I've carried for so long, then who am I? This isn't a thought that seeks philosophy. It's a recognition that the self you've been defending may never have been real. And this is where insight begins its deep work. Vipassana is the fire that burns through the illusion of self and frees what has always been hidden beneath it. Vipassana means seeing clearly, not with the eyes, but with the mind that no longer filters everything through personal story. This kind of seeing isn't passive, it's transformative. It's the practice of looking directly at experience as it arises, moment by moment, without distraction, without projection, without running. It begins as simple observation. But over time, It becomes a flame that burns through illusion. The false self is not a lie you tell. It's a structure you build over time. It's made from reactions, from roles, from early conditioning, from fear, from praise, from what you were told you should be. And because you've lived inside it for so long, it feels natural. You think you are that identity. But the more you sit with awareness, the more you begin to see that this self is a process, not a person. Insight, meditation doesn't attack this construction. It studies it. It watches it form and dissolve. It watches how a thought arises and then becomes a label, how a feeling arises and then becomes a story. And as you begin to see this process without clinging, the self begins to unravel. This unraveling is not a collapse. It's a release. It's what happens when the mind no longer needs to be somebody in order to be safe. When it sees that each moment of identity is temporary, conditioned, not worth clinging to. You begin to recognize that the self who is hurt is different from the self who reacts, that the self who fears is not fixed, that there's nothing permanent to defend. What you discover instead is the flow, the continuity of awareness that has always been present, even beneath the masks, and that awareness isn't personal, it's spacious, it doesn't take sides, it doesn't need a title, it just watches. And in that watching, healing begins to happen without force. One of the exhausting qualities of the false self is that it always feels incomplete. No matter how much you do, how much you achieve, there's always more to prove, more to protect, more to fix. And that exhaustion isn't a personal failure. It's a natural result of building identity on what changes. Vipassana shows you that you don't have to keep holding that burden. You can let it burn away, slowly, carefully, through awareness. The burning doesn't come through force. It comes through patience. You sit, you watch, you see the patterns, the way the mind grabs at praise, the way it shrinks from criticism, the way it avoids silence, the way it builds stories to feel safe. And in that seeing, you don't try to fix it. You let it be seen, and the seeing begins to dissolve it. Because nothing that arises in the mind can survive under continuous attention without clinging. The false self feeds on unquestioned thought, on habits you don't examine, but when you turn toward it with steady attention, it begins to crumble, not in crisis, but in clarity. And what follows is a kind of stillness that you may not have known before. A stillness that doesn't need to be called anything, that doesn't ask for recognition, that doesn't need to be performed. It just is. This stillness isn't passive, it's alive. From it, a different kind of action arises. One that's not motivated by ego or image. One that comes from direct contact with the moment. You begin to respond rather than react, to speak from understanding, not from defense. Insight doesn't mean becoming detached from life. It means seeing life without the filter of self-centeredness. You still feel everything, but you don't personalize everything. You learn to hold joy without grasping, pain without identity, success without pride, loss without collapse. And the more you practice, the more subtle the seeing becomes. You start to notice the thin layers of identity that still try to hide. The inner narrator who still tries to claim ownership over everything experienced, and you gently turn toward that narrator. With curiosity, you let it speak, and then you let it go. There are moments in insight practice where it feels like everything is falling away, like there's nothing left to hold. These moments can be unsettling, but they are also freeing, because in that space, you realize that you've been trying to hold up a structure that was never real, and without it, you don't disappear, you expand. This expansion doesn't feel like more, it feels like less tension, less projection, less defending, and that lessness is what makes room for a deeper connection to life, to other people, to the moment itself. Because you're no longer standing between yourself and what is. The practice of insight isn't always comfortable. It confronts, it strips away what you thought was necessary. But what remains is something you can trust. Something that doesn't shift with praise or blame. Something that doesn't break when the image cracks, and that something isn't a thing. It's a quality of being, a presence that exists before identity, a quiet knowing that doesn't need to be named. When you live from that place, you stop needing to convince anyone of anything. You just live. This is not indifference. It's freedom. Freedom from the need to be seen a certain way. Freedom from the stories that say you're never enough. Freedom from the anxiety that comes from constantly comparing, competing, explaining. Insight doesn't just change how you see yourself. It changes how you see others. You stop reducing people to roles. You see their stories as stories. You recognize the masks they wear, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because you know what it's like to wear a mask for so long, you forgot it was there. And in that knowing, you relate differently. You listen without needing to fix. You speak without needing to impress. You stay present without needing to control the outcome. And that presence becomes a form of kindness that doesn't need to be announced. Over time, the practice deepens. Insight moves beyond the mind, into the body, into the breath, into the space between thought and reaction. You begin to sense when identity is trying to rebuild itself again. And you pause. You breathe. You let it fall away. Again and again. This falling away isn't a loss, it's a returning to simplicity, to clarity, to the awareness that has always been here, waiting for you to stop pretending. You don't have to destroy the self. You just have to stop mistaking it for who you are. And in that stopping, you find something that was never burned, something real, something free. And after watching the layers of the false self burn away, in the light of insight, you might expect a feeling of power or clarity to rise immediately in its place. But what often emerges instead is a different kind of question. If I am not this identity, and if life cannot be held on to, then what now? What should I do? This question, though honest, comes from habit. The habit of striving, the urge to move forward, to improve, to achieve, even in practice. But the deepest healing comes not from doing more. It comes from the radical, quiet shift into non-striving. Non-striving is a paradox. The mind, conditioned by a lifetime of effort, doesn't know how to make sense of it. It feels like giving up, like laziness, like settling. But that's only because you've been taught that value comes from movement, from trying, from producing outcomes. In the Dharma, non-striving is not a rejection of practice. It's the maturation of it. It's what happens when you begin to trust awareness itself, rather than trying to use awareness as another way to get somewhere. This practice begins when you start noticing how much of your inner life is built on subtle pressure. Even when you meditate, there's often a quiet voice asking, "Is this working?" That voice is the voice of striving. It's the voice that turns every moment into a task, every breath into a project, every feeling into a problem that needs to be solved. And that voice, however quiet, is exhausting. Non-striving asks you to stop chasing the next moment, to stop trying to improve the one you're in. It invites you to be exactly where you are without needing the experience to change. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you begin to see that the healing you long for isn't found in effort. It's found in allowing. Allowing doesn't mean being passive. It means being willing to stay with what arises without manipulation. When you let go of the agenda to fix, the nervous system begins to settle. The body stops bracing. The mind stops grasping. You come into contact with a form of rest that doesn't depend on external circumstance. This is not a technique. It's a shift in orientation, from doing to being, from managing to meeting, from controlling to trusting. Awareness becomes spacious, not because you created it, but because you stepped out of the way. In the beginning, this can feel unfamiliar. The mind may resist. It's been trained to believe that effort is the only path to change. But effort is only helpful when it's connected to wisdom. Otherwise, it becomes force, and force, even when well-intentioned, often leads to burnout. Burnout doesn't just come from working hard. It comes from always reaching, always measuring, always comparing where you are to where you think you should be. Non-striving heals. This because it breaks the cycle of inner demand. It doesn't ask you to abandon growth. It asks you to stop treating growth like a race. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" you ask, "Can I let this feeling be here?" Instead of trying to breathe more calmly, you simply notice the breath as it is. Instead of trying to feel peaceful, you recognize the impulse to try, and you let it go. This letting go is subtle. It's not a rejection. It's a relaxation, like unclenching a fist you didn't realize was tight. You begin to notice the micro-tensions that shape your inner world, the tiny moments of resistance, the constant adjustments you make to try to feel better. And you begin to see that these adjustments, though habitual, are not necessary. You don't need to feel a certain way to be present. You don't need to reach a certain state to be whole. You don't need to solve the moment. You just need to be with it, as it is, with the gentle trust that awareness itself is enough. As this practice deepens, you begin to understand that awareness is not a tool. It's not something you use to achieve a goal. It's what you return to when you drop the idea that you have to get somewhere. It's not passive observation. It's intimate presence. It sees clearly, but it doesn't push. It stays, no matter what arises. This staying is what heals. Because most of the time, the mind doesn't stay. It tries to escape the uncomfortable. It chases the pleasant. It treats each moment like a problem. But when you stay, without strategy, without judgment, something begins to open. A kind of softness, a kind of ease, and that ease isn't weakness, it's strength. The strength to let life be life. The strength to trust that you don't have to force clarity. That truth arises on its own when you're not trying to manage everything. You may notice that, in non-striving, emotions begin to move differently. They rise and fall without so much interference. You don't have to explain them. You don't have to analyze them. You just let them pass like weather. And in that space, you begin to discover that presence is not dependent on how you feel. Even joy changes. It becomes less about excitement, more about subtle contentment. A warmth that doesn't depend on circumstance. This joy doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from releasing the need to get what you want. The paradox is that the less you try to control your experience, the more peacefully it begins to unfold. Not because you're doing something special, but because you're no longer interfering. Awareness works best when it's trusted, not controlled. And this trust takes practice, because letting go of striving doesn't mean letting go of discipline. It means letting go of the tension that comes from always trying to make the moment something other than what it is. In non-striving, you don't wait for peace to appear. You begin to realize that peace is already here, beneath the effort, covered by the constant reaching, buried under the mental chatter that says you should be different. When that chatter quietens, even briefly, the peace that remains is not something you created. It's something you remembered. This remembrance becomes the ground of your practice. You stop using meditation to achieve states. You start using it to return to what's already true. This is why the most profound shifts often happen when you least expect them, when you're not trying, when you're simply present, open, curious. Non-striving also changes your relationship with time. You stop rushing through experience. You stop measuring your practice in minutes or milestones. You let go of the timeline, and in that letting go, you step into timelessness. A state where this breath, this step, this moment is enough. And over time, life begins to feel less like a project, more like a presence. You don't have to be better every day. You don't have to measure progress. You don't have to constantly improve. You just have to return to stillness, return to breath, return to the awareness that needs nothing from you, yet gives everything in return. This is the quiet power of non-striving, the peace that arises when you finally stop trying to earn it. And once you've stopped reaching, once the inner grip of striving has softened, you begin to sense a different kind of question emerging from within. What happens when I let go, not just of effort, but of excess? What happens when I stop adding more and start subtracting what weighs me down? The answer doesn't come from theory. It comes from experience. And that experience begins with renunciation, not as a loss, but as a return. Renunciation, or nekkhamma, is often misunderstood. It sounds severe, like denial, like deprivation. But in the Buddhist path, it means something much more subtle and more liberating. It means letting go of what you don't need so you can fully feel what you do. It means simplifying not out of punishment, but out of clarity. Because Only when you stop filling every corner of your life with distraction can you hear what the heart has been trying to say all along. This letting go isn't about forcing emptiness. It's about creating space. Mental space, emotional space, space between you and the impulses that push you toward constant consumption. When you renounce something, you're not saying it's bad. You're saying, I don't want to be ruled by this anymore. That statement alone can be a turning point. The power of renunciation isn't found in what you give up. It's found in what that giving up makes possible. Most people carry too much, not just on their backs, but in their minds. Too many options, too many notifications, too many layers of noise that disguise the simplicity of what actually brings peace. Renunciation cuts through that. You start small. You look at what you've collected that no longer serves you. Not just objects, but roles, narratives, commitments that keep you busy but not fulfilled. You begin to ask, what am I holding on to out of habit, out of fear, out of ego? And you listen carefully to the answers that arise. When you let go of what isn't needed, a kind of lightness appears, not just in the environment, but in your inner world. The mind becomes less reactive, less clouded. There's room to breathe, room to feel without overwhelm, room to think clearly without being pulled in 100 directions. And this space isn't empty in a negative sense. It's fertile. It allows insight to grow. It allows emotion to be held without spilling over. It allows you to discover that happiness doesn't come from having more, but from needing less. One of the most direct benefits of renunciation is that it returns choice back to you. In a cluttered life, your attention is often hijacked. You react instead of respond. But as you simplify, you regain authority over your time, your energy, your focus. And that authority feels like peace. This peace doesn't depend on having nothing. It comes from being honest about what's actually necessary. You begin to see that many things you once called essential were actually substitutes for meaning, for connection, for rest. When you let them go, you stop reaching out and start looking in. Renunciation also heals emotional overload. Because it's not just physical things that we hoard. We hoard stories. We replay conversations. We carry expectations from everyone around us. We say yes when we mean no. We agree just to avoid conflict. And each one of these moments adds weight to the heart. Nekama offers a way to lay that weight down. And you don't have to withdraw from the world to do it. You can live a simple life in the middle of the city. You can practice letting go while living fully engaged. The key is not where you are, but how you hold what you have. Renunciation is an internal posture. It's not what you give away. It's what you no longer let control you. This practice is especially important in a world built on stimulation, where every app, every ad, every platform is designed to hold your attention, where speed is worshipped and quiet is feared. Renunciation isn't about rejecting technology or comfort. It's about refusing to be enslaved by it, about choosing depth over distraction, stillness over noise. You begin to ask different questions. Instead of, how can I fit more into my day? You ask, what can I remove that doesn't need to be there? Instead of asking, What will make me impressive? You ask, what will make me honest? These questions lead to a different kind of fulfillment. Letting go also shifts your relationship with identity. Many aspects of the false self are held in place by what you own, what you do, how you're seen. But when you start to release these attachments, even gently, you discover that who you are is not found in what you accumulate. It's found in the space you make for what's real. This space doesn't lead to isolation, it leads to presence. Because the more you strip away, the more you show up. You're no longer divided between what you're doing and what you're pretending to be. You become available to the moment, to others, to yourself. And this availability changes everything. You're not numb, you're not disconnected, you're engaged without being consumed. You care without being pulled apart. You participate without needing to control every outcome. You also begin to notice the tendency to fill emotional gaps with material things. Buying something to soothe loneliness. Distracting yourself with entertainment instead of facing grief. Renunciation isn't about shame. It's about understanding what you're actually seeking and realizing that what you're reaching for can't be found in what you're grabbing. As you continue to let go, simplicity becomes a kind of nourishment. It restores energy that was lost in complexity. It returns time that was spent on maintenance of things that didn't matter. It creates a life that feels more spacious, even if nothing has changed on the outside. And when life does bring pain, that simplicity makes room for it. You're not so overcrowded that you can't feel it. You're not so distracted that you can't grieve. The heart has room to open without being flooded. You also develop a new relationship with enoughness. You stop chasing an imagined future where you finally feel settled. You start recognizing what's already here. Renunciation clears the space to see that contentment isn't a destination. It's a result of releasing the idea that you're missing something. This practice is ongoing. It's not a one-time decision. It's a daily inquiry. What am I holding on to that's weighing me down? What can I set down today that will help me walk more lightly? Sometimes it's an object, sometimes a habit, sometimes a thought. And with each letting go, you create room for stillness, for clarity, for joy that doesn't come from possession, but from presence. This is the quiet power of renunciation. Not a life of less, but a life with room to truly live. And as the life around you becomes simpler, as you begin to set down what you no longer need, something more subtle comes into focus. Even with fewer distractions, even as outer clutter falls away, you start to notice the source of most movement still comes from within. A thought forms, a word is spoken, a choice is made, and beneath all of it, there is something quiet but powerful at work. Intention, not always obvious, often automatic, but always present. And that's where the heart of karma begins, in satana. Satana means intention. It is what moves the mind into action. Every word, gesture, reaction, and habit begins with it. Whether you're aware of it or not, satana is already shaping your life. It's planting seeds with every decision. Some bloom into peace, some into regret. But the seed itself is always the same, a mental push towards something. And that push is what gives action its moral and emotional weight. Karma isn't about punishment or reward. It's not a cosmic scorecard. It's about the momentum created by mind states. What you intend carves a path that you then walk. This means that even before you speak, before you move, the direction of your life has already tilted in one way or another. That's the power of intention, and it's why being mindful of it can completely transform how you relate to experience. Most people don't realize how much of their life is driven by unseen intentions. You think you're just speaking, just doing what needs to be done. But if you slow down, you'll notice the motivation that came first. Was it fear? Was it ego? Was it love? Was it habit? That first spark, that first mental push, shapes not just what you do, but how it feels after it's done. This is where mindfulness comes in. Not just as moment-to-moment awareness, but as a way of getting quiet enough to see what's moving you. You begin to catch the subtle urge before it becomes a reaction. You notice the tone of the thought before it becomes a word. You begin to ask, not what am I doing, but why am I doing it? And the why changes everything. Because actions that seem alike on the outside can carry completely different energies. You can help someone out of guilt or out of generosity. You can stay silent out of wisdom or out of fear. You can speak out of compassion or out of a need to be right. Only you know which it is, and that knowing is where real change begins. Refining intention doesn't mean you have to become rigid or overly anxious. It means you begin to care more about the energy you're bringing into each moment. You begin to choose rather than react. You begin to plant seeds on purpose instead of by accident. This practice can start with the smallest actions. Before you pick up the phone, pause. Ask yourself, what am I hoping to bring into this conversation? Before you eat, am I nourishing or numbing? Before you respond, in a conflict, is this coming from clarity or from old pain? These pauses don't take time, they create time, they give you room to align. When you move from clear intention, your actions feel lighter, more honest, less draining, because you're no longer acting from confusion. You're acting from connection, and that connection keeps you rooted, even in the middle of uncertainty. Intention is also what shapes your inner world. The stories you repeat, the emotions you feed, the way you speak to yourself, all of it has a seed. And that seed can be transformed. If you notice you keep planting self-doubt, you don't have to shame yourself. You just begin planting something different. Gentleness, curiosity, patience. This shift isn't instant. Karma has momentum, and so do mental habits. But when you keep planting different seeds, even quietly, the garden begins to change. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but over time, you wake up to a mind that's less reactive, a heart that's less tight, a life that feels more like it belongs to you. And when mistakes happen, because they will, you don't spiral, you reflect, you return. You ask, what was my intention? Not to excuse, but to understand. Because without understanding, growth becomes imitation. With understanding, growth becomes real. You also learn to hold others differently. You stop judging actions at the surface level. you start listening for the intention behind the behavior, and sometimes that listening reveals pain where you thought there was malice. It reveals insecurity where you saw arrogance. It opens compassion because you see that everyone is moving from some inner pull, and most don't know what that pull even is. In this way, awareness of Satana deepens all your relationships. It allows you to communicate with less defensiveness, to apologize with more sincerity, to forgive with more clarity, because you know the difference between someone acting with harmful intent and someone acting from habitual confusion. This practice doesn't require you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest, again and again, to check in, to realign, to notice when old patterns arise and gently redirect, not with harshness, but with the quiet power of intention set anew. One of the deepest forms of healing comes when you stop trying to change the past and instead begin planting seeds for a different future. The past may still echo, but it doesn't have to repeat. Each present moment is a chance to tilt your path in a new direction. Even a fraction of a degree over time leads to a completely new destination. Intention doesn't need to be dramatic. You don't need to wake up every day with a grand plan. Sometimes it's as simple as, "May I be present," or "May I cause no harm," or "May I learn something today." These quiet commitments become inner anchors. They keep you steady when life pulls at you. And as you refine your intention, you begin to trust yourself more. Because you're not just reacting, you're choosing. You're living from a place of purpose, even in small things. You begin to see that what matters isn't how much you do, but where it comes from. This doesn't mean you always feel good. Emotions will still rise. Conflict will still happen. But when your intentions are clear, you rest easier, even in difficulty, because you know you're moving from a place of integrity, and that integrity is what builds real confidence. You stop living a life of accidental karma. You start living a life of intentional energy, and that energy, planted again and again, begins to shape not just the way you feel, but the way you live. And in that living, you're no longer just reacting to what happens. You're participating in what you create. And as you begin living from intention rather than habit, something deep inside you starts to quiet. The old urgency lessens. Your choices become simpler but more powerful. There's clarity, there's ground. But alongside that steadiness, you might start to notice a strange absence, not in yourself, but in how you relate to others. You're more aware, more present, more honest. Yet there's still a lingering tension when someone else succeeds, a quiet ache when they receive what you long for. This is where the heart meets one of its final tests. Can you truly rejoice in the joy of another? This is the path of mudita. Mudita is joy that comes not from personal gain, but from witnessing the joy of someone else. It sounds simple, but for most, it's one of the hardest practices. Not because we don't want others to be happy, but because we've been taught, often without words, that life is a competition, that if they win, we must be losing, that someone else's good fortune highlights our lack, that we're falling behind. This mental framing creates a kind of scarcity that isn't about money or resources, it's emotional. a tight, protective way of seeing that closes the heart to shared happiness. Instead of feeling warmth, we feel distance. Instead of celebrating, we compare. And every time we do, we reinforce a world where joy feels threatening unless it belongs to us. Mudita begins with undoing that, with training the heart to see happiness as abundant, as shared, as something that can be widened rather than owned. It begins with awareness, noticing the twinge of envy, the sharpness of insecurity, the subtle ways the mind tries to diminish what others have so we can feel taller. This isn't a moral failure. It's conditioning, but it can be unlearned, because underneath that reflex to compare is a deeper truth, that rejoicing in others doesn't diminish us. It heals us. It lifts something in us that has been crushed by isolation and rivalry. It reminds us that we are not separate from joy, even when it isn't ours directly. Practicing mudita starts small. You begin by noticing how often the mind slips into comparison. You hear news of someone else's success, and instead of smiling, you shrink. You don't shame yourself for that response. You just see it. And you pause long enough to ask a different question. What if this joy can also be mine, not as possession, but as participation? That shift, over time, changes everything. Because you begin to see that envy doesn't protect you. It starves you. It locks you out of joy because it trains your mind to look for what's missing instead of what's alive. Mudita opens that lock, not by pretending, not by forcing praise, but by genuinely training the heart to recognize joy as joy, no matter whose life it appears in. You can practice this every day. Start with strangers. Watch someone laugh across a cafe. Hear about a neighbor's good news. Instead of moving on, pause, feel it. Even just for a few seconds, let that joy enter your chest as if it were your own. You don't have to force a smile. Just let the tightness soften. This isn't performance, it's practice. You can also bring mudita into relationships, especially with those closest to you. Because sometimes that's where it's hardest. Not because you don't love them, but because the closeness exposes your own insecurities. Their growth might remind you of where you still struggle. But this is the very edge where transformation lives. You begin to catch the mind when it says, "Why not me?" And instead, you whisper back, "Their joy doesn't mean I've failed." Over time, that whisper becomes your default. You stop measuring worth by comparison. You stop measuring progress by outpacing others. You start living from wholeness, not from scarcity. Mudita also offers relief from the burden of self-importance. Because when you can genuinely rejoice in another, you're not centering yourself. You're letting go of the need to be special in order to feel joy. You're saying, "This happiness is real, and that's enough." That letting go is a kind of freedom most people never taste. This joy doesn't mean you ignore your own pain. It means you stop using pain as a reason to withhold love. You can still grieve, still heal, still struggle, and still let someone else's light touch you. That's not weakness. That's strength of heart, the kind that doesn't close just because it hurts. Over time, this practice changes how you move through the world. You stop seeing other people as threats. You stop rooting your confidence in comparison. You become a source of encouragement instead of silence. A mirror of joy instead of a wall of distance. Even in work, creativity, or success, mudita teaches you to celebrate without claiming. You can admire without imitating. You can witness brilliance without feeling small, because you know that life is not a zero-sum game. The light in another doesn't dim yours. It helps you see more clearly. This practice also rebuilds connection. Because so much of disconnection comes from unspoken competition, from the feeling that you have to guard your joy or hide your struggles. Mudita makes space for both. It says, you can shine and I can stand with you, not against you. That presence is healing for you, for them, for everyone around you. And when you can't feel joy for someone else, mudita still has something to offer. It teaches you honesty. It teaches you to acknowledge the tightness, the jealousy, the grief, to sit with it without acting on it, and to stay open enough that one day that pain can soften into a smile. Not fake, not forced, just real. Because mudita isn't about pretending, it's about learning to see the fullness of life even when it doesn't favor you in the moment. It's about remembering that joy is not a resource you have to compete for. It's a flame that spreads without diminishing, and the more you tend that flame in others, the more it lights up the corners in you that have forgotten how to feel. You begin to discover that the deepest joy is not the one that shouts, "Look at me." It's the one that whispers, "I'm happy because you are." That joy is quiet, but it's enduring. It's a joy that doesn't depend on winning. It lives in the background, like a warm current, carrying you through moments when your own joy feels far away. And over time, that current becomes a river, one that feeds everything it touches. Not because you tried to build it, but because you stopped blocking it. You let it flow. You let it belong to everyone. And in doing so, you found a joy that doesn't fade. A joy that heals without needing to be yours alone. And as you begin to feel joy that's not dependent on possession, as your heart softens enough to rejoice in others without comparing, something becomes clear. Happiness was never meant to be hoarded. It was always meant to be shared. But even in that shared joy, even in that wide, compassionate space, the mind still moves. It jumps ahead. It replays the past. It builds fantasies and fear. And without meaning to, you find yourself far from where you actually are. This is the nature of a wandering mind. Not because it's broken, but because it's searching. What it's truly searching for, though, can only ever be found in one place, right here, right now. The present moment is not just an idea. It is a refuge, a shelter for a tired heart, a place where the mind can lay down its weapons. The present doesn't demand, it doesn't chase, it simply waits. Yet most people spend their lives running from it, not intentionally, but out of habit. The mind moves forward, out of hope, and backward, out of regret. In both directions, it misses the only place where real peace lives. Taming the wandering mind begins not by forcing stillness, but by recognizing that the mind moves because it's trying to protect you. It believes that if it rehearses the future, it can prevent failure. If it replays the past, it can find certainty. But that movement comes at a cost. It fragments attention. It drains energy. It creates a constant hum of restlessness. This restlessness feels familiar, but it's not natural. It's a habit that's been practiced so often it feels like truth. But when you begin to observe the mind instead of following it, a space opens up. That space is awareness. And in that space, the present becomes available. You don't need to silence the mind. You only need to stop believing that every thought deserves your attention. Not every thought is useful. Not every mental narrative leads to insight. Many lead you away from what's happening now, and what's happening now is the only place transformation is possible. Returning to the present is a skill, and like any skill, it requires practice. It begins with noticing when you've left. Noticing when you're lost in thought, not with judgment, but with curiosity. You simply say, "Here I am," and breathe. The moment you say it, you're back, and what you return to isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's boredom, sometimes it's sadness, sometimes it's a body that feels heavy or a mind that feels flat. But that's okay. The present doesn't guarantee comfort. It offers honesty, and that honesty is where real rest begins. Because the wandering mind isn't just distracted, it's exhausted. From trying to control what it can't control, from trying to fix what isn't broken, from trying to escape what needs to be felt. Bringing the mind home is an act of compassion. You're not forcing it into stillness. You're giving it permission to stop running. This homecoming can happen in any moment. Washing dishes, hearing rain, feeling breath. There's no special setting required. What matters is attention, not as force, but as friendship. You offer your attention like you would offer a warm hand to a child. Steady, kind, without pressure. The mind will still wander. That's its nature. But the difference is you don't have to follow it every time. You can learn to pause before you chase the thought, to breathe before you believe it. That pause is a kind of power. It breaks the pattern of automatic reaction. Staying present also changes the way you experience emotion. Instead of getting pulled into the story around a feeling, you begin to notice the feeling itself. Tightness, heat, movement. You feel it not as a problem, but as a passing experience. It rises, it peaks, it fades, and through it all, you stay. This staying builds resilience. Not the kind that grits its teeth, but the kind that opens its heart. You discover that most of what you feared couldn't be tolerated can be felt and released if you're willing to remain. This is the gift of presence. It doesn't require you to understand everything. It asks you to experience everything as it comes, without decoration, without resistance, just as it is. And in that simplicity, you start to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. A softness, a kind of ease that has nothing to do with external conditions. It's not blissful, it's real. It's the kind of ease that comes from not needing anything to be different. Presence doesn't mean you lose motivation. It means you're no longer driven by anxiety. You can still plan, still create, still move, but from ground, not from panic, from wholeness, not from scarcity. This shift also changes relationships. When you're present, you listen differently. You speak with more clarity. You're not just waiting for your turn. You're here, available. And that availability is rare. It feels like safety to those around you, because they can sense you're not somewhere else in your mind. You're with them. Even in solitude, the present becomes a companion. You no longer need constant input to avoid yourself. You learn to sit in silence without feeling empty. You learn that being with yourself isn't something to fear, it's something to reclaim. There will be times when the mind resists, when it feels unbearable to stay. That's not a failure. That's a sign of how much has been avoided. You stay anyway. You breathe. You touch the moment gently. You let it unfold. And as you practice, the wandering mind becomes less chaotic. Not because it stops moving, but because you're no longer chasing every movement. You're watching with kindness. You're letting the waves pass. You're becoming the sky, not just the weather. This is where rest lives. Not in perfect stillness, but in presence that doesn't run, in attention that doesn't judge, in awareness that doesn't demand results. The present is not a concept. It's a place. And every time you return, you heal the part of you that believed you had to leave to find peace. There's nothing missing here. You're already home. And as you learn to rest in the present, as the mind grows, still enough to witness each moment without needing to escape it, something becomes clear. Peace is possible, but it's fragile when tied to circumstances. Even with a calm mind, even with a grounded heart, life will still change. People will come and go. Events will uplift one day and disappoint the next. The world keeps turning, and with every turn you feel pulled. This is where true stability is tested. Because the real challenge isn't simply finding presence, it's staying present when life moves in opposite directions. This is where the 8 worldly winds begin to blow. The Buddha described these winds as gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. They are the opposites that pull at every human heart. And if you're not rooted in something deeper, they will shake you, not because you're weak, but because you're human. The winds don't discriminate. They touch everyone, but how you meet them determines whether you're moved by every breeze or anchored through every storm. Gain brings excitement, a sense of arrival, a feeling that things are going right. But if you attach your identity to gain, you will fear its loss before you've even enjoyed its presence. You will begin to guard it, to chase more. And that chase will exhaust you, because gain is always temporary. What you build today can shift tomorrow. What you receive can be taken. The wisdom is not in avoiding gain, it's in not being owned by it. Loss brings its own lessons. It cuts, it strips away what you've clung to, but it also reveals what remains. When you're not defined by what you have, loss becomes less personal. It still hurts, but it doesn't destroy you. Because your peace was never planted in something that could be taken. This is what it means to be untouched. Not that nothing affects you, but that nothing owns you. Praise feels like warmth, like being seen, like validation for who you are. But praise can be addictive. It can become a mirror you depend on. You shape yourself to be liked, to be approved of, and in doing so, you drift from your own integrity. You start to say what others want to hear, to perform rather than live. Real freedom comes when you can receive praise without needing it. Blame stings because it feels like rejection, but sometimes it's also a mirror. Sometimes there's truth in it, sometimes there isn't. Wisdom means being able to hear blame without crumbling or reacting. You pause, you reflect, you learn where it's useful, you discard what doesn't belong to you. You don't let every criticism define you, but you don't ignore what can teach you either. Fame is seductive because it feels like worth. When people admire you, it's easy to believe you've arrived. But that spotlight can blind you. It can make you fear disapproval. It can inflate the ego and starve the soul. True practice is being visible without needing to be seen, letting recognition come and go without chasing it or hiding from it. Shame is fame's shadow. It can feel crushing, like a weight that doesn't lift, but often shame thrives on secrecy, on the belief that you are alone in your mistakes. When you shine, awareness on shame, it begins to shrink. You stop running from it. You name it. You learn from it. You release it. Not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to be real. Pleasure is not wrong. It's part of being alive. The warmth of the sun, the taste of a favorite meal, the joy of connection. But when you cling to pleasure, it turns into craving. You fear its end. You try to stretch it beyond its life. And that grasping leads to restlessness. When you can enjoy without owning, pleasure becomes a gift instead of a chain. Pain is inevitable, physical, emotional, relational. But suffering grows when you resist it, when you believe it shouldn't be here. Presence with pain doesn't remove it, but it softens the struggle. You learn to stay, to breathe through it, to let it move without needing it to leave on your timeline. That willingness to stay is what turns pain into transformation. These 8 winds will always blow. You cannot escape them, but you can build a center that doesn't shatter with every gust. This center is awareness, not as a concept, as a living practice. A way of meeting experience without gripping it, without running, without making every high into a peak you must return to, and every low into a failure you must escape. Remaining balanced in the midst of these opposites doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't attach your identity to what you feel. You don't let the winds decide who you are. You meet each one with steadiness, with curiosity, with humility. This kind of balance is not indifference. It's full participation without collapse. It's saying yes to life without being ruled by its shifting form. You let gain come without needing to protect it. You let loss teach without letting it define you. You let praise in without losing your voice. You let blame point to growth without crushing your spirit. The practice is ongoing. It happens in conversations, in headlines, in internal dialogues. You catch yourself rising with one wind, falling with another. You pause, you return, you choose not to follow the swing. This choice doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a breath before you respond, as a smile without needing approval, as a moment of stillness in the middle of noise. And as you practice, you begin to notice something new, a kind of emotional immunity, not in the sense of being untouchable, but in the sense of recovering faster, of trusting more deeply, of returning more quickly to your center after being pulled. This immunity isn't coldness, it's warmth that doesn't burn out, it's presence that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's wisdom that holds you even when everything around you is in motion. You begin to see that life isn't something to win, it's something to live, and that living fully means opening to every wind without losing yourself in the storm. You're not meant to control the winds. You're meant to root deep enough that you no longer fear them, and as you learn to stand steady in the midst of the worldly winds, not avoiding them but no longer controlled by them, you begin to notice something quieter. Beneath the obvious swings of gain and loss, praise and blame, there's a constant tug inside. It's not loud, it doesn't always announce itself, but it's there, a subtle reaching, a tightness that shows up in the chest, the jaw, the breath, and if you stay with it long enough, you start to see what it is. Clinging, not just to things, but to how you want life to feel. This clinging is what exhausts the heart even more than pain itself. And the path to relief doesn't begin with struggle. It begins with letting be. Clinging is one of the most natural tendencies of the mind. It grabs onto what feels good and pushes away what doesn't. It seeks to hold pleasure in place as if it could stop time, and when discomfort arises, it tenses, trying to make it leave faster. This habit is so deep, most people don't even know it's happening. They just feel drained, stuck, disconnected. But when you bring awareness to the subtle grasping, you begin to see why peace is so fleeting. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that you're holding too tight. Letting be is not giving up. It's giving space. It's a willingness to let things exist without needing to fix, change, or control them. That might sound passive, but it's one of the most powerful shifts you can make, because clinging doesn't just show up in obvious attachments. It appears in thought patterns, in expectations, in the silent script that says you're only okay if things go a certain way. This grasping lives everywhere, in the desire to keep joy from ending, in the urge to make sadness go away, in the need to understand every feeling before you allow it. The heart becomes tired, not because of what it feels, but because it's always trying to manage what it feels, always trying to pull closer what's pleasant, always trying to escape what's not. Letting be is the counter-movement. It doesn't require you to like everything. It asks you to stop arguing with what's already here. That argument takes energy. It creates tension that spreads from the mind into the body. It feeds anxiety. It clouds perception. When you let be, that tension has a chance to unwind. You begin this practice by noticing when clinging arises. Not just in craving, but in subtle moments of resistance. You hear bad news, and the mind says, "No, this shouldn't be happening." You feel sad, and the mind says, "I need to fix this right now." That rejection of the present is a form of grasping. It's not always loud, but it's always there when peace feels just out of reach. The way through is gentle. You don't force yourself to let go. You don't shame yourself for holding on. You simply start with a breath. You say, "This too," and let the moment unfold. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it doesn't make sense. You let the feeling live without needing to control it. This allowing changes everything. Because clinging doesn't just create suffering, it prolongs it. The emotion might last a few minutes, but the story about the emotion can last hours, days, even years. Letting be doesn't make the emotion disappear. It lets it complete its natural arc. You step out of the way, you stop fueling the flame. There's a freedom in this that most people never taste. The freedom to feel without being trapped by feeling. The freedom to care without clinging to outcomes. The freedom to move through experience without getting tangled in every thought that arises around it. This practice doesn't mean you become passive in life. It means you stop resisting what you can't control. And in doing so, you save your energy for what you can influence. You act without attachment. You love without possession. You show up without needing everything to go your way. Even joy feels different when you let it be. You don't rush to capture it. You don't try to stretch it out. You simply let it flow. You enjoy it while it's here, and you let it leave when it's done. No clinging, no story that it should have lasted longer. Just gratitude for the moment as it was. Pain also becomes less heavy, because you're not layering it with judgment. You're not saying, "This shouldn't be here." You're saying, "This is here." That shift doesn't remove pain, but it removes isolation. It removes the extra layer that says you're failing because you're struggling. It makes room for tenderness. And tenderness is where healing lives, not in pushing through, not in solving every emotion, but in creating a space where even the most difficult feeling can sit down, breathe, and soften. Letting be is what makes that space possible. You can practice this in any moment. When you're tired, when you're anxious, when you feel overwhelmed. You pause, you notice what's here, you breathe. You don't try to push it away. You don't try to explain it. You let it be. And then you watch what happens when you stop controlling everything. Sometimes the feeling will stay. Sometimes it will pass. But either way, you won't be as drained, because you've stepped out of the role of manager. You've stepped into the role of witness, and that witness is where peace begins. Letting be also teaches you how to hold others, not to fix them, not to force their process to move faster, but to sit with them without needing to change what they feel. This presence is rare and healing because it says, "You're allowed to be exactly where you are, and I'll still be here." This is what you learn to offer yourself too, the same space, the same patience, the same willingness to stay with what's real. No agenda, no performance, just a quiet trust that what's arising can be met without collapse. Over time, this way of living becomes less effortful. You no longer react to every pull. You no longer chase every thought. You stop grabbing and start receiving. Life becomes something you flow with, not something you try to pin down. And in that flow, you find energy that was never lost, only bound up in resistance. You find rest in places you thought you'd never relax. You find that letting be is not just a practice, it's a form of love, one that doesn't ask anything to be different in order to be held. And now, as you lie here, breath steady, mind softer than when you first began, feel what shifted. Not everything has been solved. Not every answer has arrived. But something has quieted. The weight you've been carrying is no longer pressing so hard against your chest, because tonight you didn't escape your pain. You sat with it, you breathed through it, you heard teachings not as ideas, but as medicine. You remembered that peace isn't a reward for perfection. It's a return to what was always waiting inside you. From noble silence to letting go, from compassion to equanimity, from breath to presence. Each teaching was not just a concept, but a key. And if even one key opened something for you tonight, then let that be enough. Let that be your beginning. Before you drift off, let us know which teaching spoke most deeply to your heart. Was it the power of renunciation, the calm in non-striving, the tenderness of mudita? Share your reflection in the comments below. It may be exactly what someone else needs to read tonight. And if these teachings held you, even for a moment, subscribe to the channel so you can return whenever life feels too heavy. There's always more here for you. Until next time, sleep deeply, rest gently, and remember, your heart is worth healing.